Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another ISSessions. We got a great evening for you today. Got a fantastic news roundup by our two executive friends, Yusuf and Luai. Then after that, we got Memory Lane, Buffer Overflow. This is kind of like a weird news segment we're going to try out, presented by me and Jem. And then we'll have a short break, followed by our guest speakers. We have two. Kenny Hartlub and Andrew Major are going to be breaking into red team and incident response, so stick around for that as well. I believe first up, let me click, there we go, awesome. Luai, do you want to introduce your workshop coming up?
Yeah, sounds good. So we have a new workshop coming up. I'll be running it. It's on December 6th. And it's going to be, so that's a Saturday. It's going to be at 1 o'clock. It's going to be online. We don't know exactly which platform we're going to use yet, but we will let you know in an announcement that follows this one, hopefully tomorrow. What the workshop is about is it's about the Python module called Pandas. What Pandas is it's a Python data analytics library. So as you know, as security analysts, we deal with data all the time. So we deal with things like logs, user behavior analytics. We deal from tons of data for enrichment from all kinds of APIs. As a red teamer, for example, you might enumerate a machine and get a whole bunch of data that you want to analyze very quickly. So if you're interested in learning about how to analyze that data very quickly using Pandas and automating that process, this is the workshop for you. Another segment of people that might be interested in this would be people who are interested in any kind of machine learning. So we're not going to be doing any machine learning algorithms. I'm not a machine learning expert by any means, but learning Pandas is definitely crucial to knowing machine learning in the future. If you've heard of Spark data frames, Apache Spark, Pandas is very similar, except that it typically runs on a single machine as opposed to a distributed like Hadoop cluster. So this is going to be an introductory workshop. Like I'm going to start from the very beginning. I know that a ton of the people in this program don't really necessarily know Python because we don't really learn it in school. So even if you don't know Python, though, I think this workshop will be really nice. You're going to pick up things very, very, very quickly. It's going to be very hands-on. I'm basically just going to explain a concept, give you a couple exercises, explain another concept, give you another couple of exercises. So anyway, if any of that sounded interesting, if you've heard me speak and you like the way that I explain things or teach things, then that's another reason why this workshop would be for you. So this is my first one. I'm hoping it's going to go well, and I'm excited to see as many of you there as possible. Yeah, thank you very much. Back to you, Kurt.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited. And honestly, Luai, I would go to anything you teach.
Me too.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Yusuf.
So yeah, next up, back to Luai and Yusuf with the awesome news.
Awesome. Thank you, Kurt. Hey there, everybody. The name's Yusuf, if you don't already know. So this first article is really, really interesting to me, simply because I own a Google Home, and I think a lot of us do. Whether it be a Google Home or Amazon Alexa or some sort of pod device that you can interact with. So a couple of researchers found that you can flash a light or a laser almost to the microphone of a Google Home or Amazon Alexa and send electrical signals that the microphone would receive as voice commands. What they're calling this is light commands. The researchers, a professor from the University of Florida named Sarah, and a PhD student from the University of Michigan, Benjamin, found this out. Through these light commands, they would be able to make purchases on the device as the owner normally would. The reason that they're able to do this kind of stuff is because devices like this, or home devices or smart devices, don't really lack user authentication. Now, what's interesting when I was doing this, and Luai brought up a really good point, is how do you user authenticate with a device like that. They mention as a hardware solution in the article that you could cover up the microphone and prevent light from entering, which would be some way of providing that solution. But it's really interesting. It's something to think about. The crazy part is these lasers or these lights can be shone from 360 feet away. If you look at the bottom diagram right here, you kind of see the whole process of this and how far a Google Home was. So I guess a tidbit or something from this is don't put your Google Homes beside a window. So how do I go back? Thank you.
All right, so BloodHound 4.0 is out. So this is called the Azure update. So for those of you that don't know what BloodHound is, it's essentially a tool that's used by attackers and defenders to analyze attack paths in on-prem Active Directory environments. And the way that it does that is that it uses this thing called a Neo4j database. It's a graphing database. And then you can ask this database certain questions using these things called cipher queries. So you can ask, what is the shortest path to a certain node? So for example, what is the shortest path to a domain admin? So what's special about this update? So this was released at SoCon, so SoCon, you can pronounce it either way, in a presentation called 6 Degrees of Global Admin. So this actually, the name there follows another great presentation when BloodHound was first released called 6 Degrees of Domain Admin. And that was a really cool presentation. It was a DEF CON talk. I encourage everyone to watch it because during the presentation, they released this awesome thing, which essentially allows you to graph the attack paths in an Active Directory environment. And when they ended the presentation, they eventually kind of did this thing where they made the GitHub repo public, and it's like one of the most like landmark moments in security, I would say, to release that to the community and to allow them to use the power of that BloodHound offers. So what does the Azure update or BloodHound 4.0 actually offer? So it's really adding support for Azure. Azure is Microsoft's Active Directory in the cloud, essentially. So it adds 2 new node types, so tenants, Azure users, Azure security groups, apps, service principals, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And really, this unlocks endless possibilities. So imagine that you can actually find an attack path that starts off as a low-privileged Azure user and then ends up giving you global admin privileges. So that's cool, right? And that's something that you would expect. So you go from a low-privileged user to a high-privileged user. But what's insane now is that since Azure Hound and BloodHound 4.0 essentially allows you to do is, since it supports both on-prem environments, so on-premises environments, and also cloud environments, you can also find attack paths now that start on-prem, go up all the way into Azure, and then go back down into on-prem. So you can actually pivot as much as you want, even if there was no attack path with a purely on-prem environment. Now, if there is something called Azure AD Connect, which connects your on-prem environment to your Azure tenant environment, you can actually pivot up and then back down and then up and back down again until you get to your target or the application or the user that you want to try and exploit. So just I want to give credit where credit is due. So this is made by Andy Robbins, Rohan Vazirkar, Ryan Hosknecht, and of course our very own Yusuf Islaya. It's an insanely cool project, exploration idea. So you definitely want to check it out if you have some free time. It sounds great in an interview if you mention BloodHound, and you'll learn a lot for sure. Back to my brother from another mother, Yusuf.
That's a really cool story, and it's crazy because I don't recall being a part of it, but apparently I was. So, yay me! I'm great.
Good job, Yusuf.
But thank you. I deserve all the creds. But yeah. Anyways, this story is really interesting in that it talks about the use of vishing or voice phishing. Now, I only learned that recently. I knew that voice phishing was a thing, but I didn't know that there was an actual term for it, which is vishing. So there's a cool tidbit for you if you didn't know. So essentially, what these attackers did is they would call GoDaddy support staff, posing as the GoDaddy IT team, and they would specifically target employees or support staff that worked offsite from home or a different office instead of the main location. They would say that there was something wrong with their VPN, and that they were there to fix it. Because they are working from an offsite location, they would need a VPN to connect to the GoDaddy servers. So they would attempt to get the support staff's credentials simply by either just asking them for it, or by sending them a link posing as a legit GoDaddy website, which is in fact not legit. So through this, they were able to receive half a dozen or more than 6 domain names, access to those domains. And the 3 that the article mentioned was liquid.com, NiceHash, and escrow.com. They were able to, through all of this, access some of the DNS servers for those domains. And in the case of liquid.com, through accessing the DNS records, they were in turn able to take control of a number of internal email accounts. And it's really cool to see how, I guess, phishing is becoming a lot more common, and that it's also easier than something like just an email phishing campaign or scam, simply because it's more legit, and you can kind of use people have confidence in their voice, and with that confidence, you can build trust with the person that you're trying to so-called attack. So that's interesting. This one's really, really cool. This one's super cool. And it's funny because I don't know if you guys remember, I didn't know this till recently. Elon Musk, a couple years back during a conference or a release or whatever of Tesla, said that the Teslas are unhackable. And then 5 minutes later in that actual talk, the car was hacked. But yeah, so this researcher by the name of, I will get it for you in a second, found Leonard Wouters. He's a security researcher out of Belgian University. And he was able to connect to the key fob of a Tesla, and then not only unlock the car, get in and turn on the car and take it. So essentially what he did is, by getting a Bluetooth radio, connect to that key fob. Now anyone can do this, but the interesting thing is the key fob doesn't check what's called a code signing, doesn't have any code signing mechanisms when it receives these updates. So he was able to rewrite the firmware of the key fob and then get the key fob to send back the unlock code. With that unlock code, he's able to now unlock the car. The thing is, when you get inside the car, you need the actual key fob, the original key fob, to turn on the car. But if you connect a computer to a certain port in the car under some sort of storage compartment, you're able to just simply, I mean, I'm making this sound a lot easier than it is. It's definitely not simply, but you're able to connect your fake key fob to the car, posing as the real key fob. And then with that, you're able to turn on the car and drive away. The only things that you need from the car itself or from the owner of the car is the VIN number of the car, which you can see through the dashboard if you're close enough. Sorry, if you don't know what a key fob is, I'm so sorry. A key fob is the thing that you kind of, I have an old car, so I just have an actual key, but a key fob is the thing where you press the buttons to unlock the car or turn on the car. I don't know if that's the greatest explanation of a key fob, but that's what it is. My car's too old for that. So yeah, so you only need the VIN number, which you can see through the dash, and you need to be 15 feet away from the original key fob to connect it to your Bluetooth radio. And then all the things that you need only actually cost around $300, which is interesting. The article doesn't say anything more about how the process works, just because the researcher didn't want to release all his research, because this is yet to be fixed.
Right. So there's a new Egregor ransomware out there. So and it seems to have filled the Maze Group's shoes. The ransomware is called Egregor. It's had a ton of impact over the last 3 months. So it had approximately 15 organizations as victims in September, another 51 organizations as victims in October, and another 21 victims in November, and we're not even done the month yet. And the reason this ransomware is cool. I mean, it's bad, of course, but it's also cool. Those two things are not mutually exclusive in this industry, is because it has a ton of anti-analysis options. The payload is obfuscated, packed, and encrypted, and you really can't analyze it until you provide the correct command line argument, which essentially acts as a decryption key so that you can actually take a look at what the ransomware does. So how do you actually take a look at it if it's packed and obfuscated and encrypted? Well, you need logs, right? So that's why it's so important to be sending everything in real time to a SIEM so that you can actually read off that command line parameter and you can actually take a look at what this ransomware is doing. It's had some pretty big targets. So, for example, Barnes and Noble. It's had Ubisoft as well. So I think one game's source code was even stolen. Now, why is this a big story? It's because another ransomware group called Maze actually recently announced that they will not, that they will actually cease operations, so that they're not going to continue spreading the ransomware. And into their shoes steps this new group. Now, the key question is, why did Maze cease operations? Well, of course, Yusuf Islaya appealed to their better angels and convinced them to. Back to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, we were having this conversation because I'm apparently a malware expert now too, and malware is super duper cool. I never realized this only until recently, but if that's something you're interested in, I think malware is super cool, and analyzing it is probably something very fun. I'm obviously very good at it, as Luai said, but
Agreed.
yeah,
100%.
thanks, Luai. Don't actually come to me for malware advice. I know nothing about malware. Just making sure that everyone knows that. Anyways, so if you don't know what TrickBot is another piece of malware which is used to do a bunch of really cool, and I guess not cool, bad, as Luai said, things. So it's got the ability to steal SSH keys. It's also got the ability to steal domains Active Directory services, screen locking, and stealing cookies and browser passwords. So very, very interesting malware. Now, the cool thing about this article right now is essentially Microsoft and a couple other teams tried to attack the TrickBot infrastructure because it's been wreaking havoc. And so they thought that would slow them down a bit, but just recently they released TrickBot version 100. And the cool thing about this is it's got a whole bunch of new detection evading features. The main one being that it hides or injects itself into a Windows legit process called WERMGREXC. I don't know what that stands for. If it stands for anything, if you do, tell me. That'd be good to know. And another really cool thing about this version is now it's got it can steal open SSH keys. It also does all of this by it relies on the fileless method from the memory module library to map its core DLL from memory without relying on the file system DLL loading. So it's really interesting. A couple of things that it was known for before Microsoft actually tried to take down their servers is it was dubbed as a Lightbot tool, or Lightbot, which is used for reconnaissance, and a couple other things. I'm not going to mention all of them right now, but it was a very, very interesting malware, and now it's got a new version. So I'm obviously a pro at malware, so I know everything and anything about TrickBot. So shout out to my boy Jamie, because he actually told me about this when it happened. A lot of you may already know this because it was all over the news. Christopher, or Chris Krebs, is the head of CISA in the States. That's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and he was recently fired. I think it was only a week ago. And essentially, one of his main roles is to dispel disinformation about the voting process. I'm not going to say that's his main job, but it is a big portion of his job. And so you can imagine the frustration in Trump when he alleged or kind of shut down his whole proposal that the vote was stolen from him. He said that, and I quote, the November 3rd election was the most secure in American history. He also released a a blog with his team called Rumor Control, which is used to address these conspiracy theories that the president fires off. The article goes into talk about how amazing Krebs is at his job and the great work that he's done for the American people. One of the people that the article quoted was Sean Angus King, who's an independent from Maine and the co-chair of a commission to improve the nation's cyber defense posture. Sorry. And he said that by firing Mr. Krebs for simply doing his job, President Trump is inflicting severe damage on all Americans who rely on CISA's defense, even if they don't know it. Back to my brother, who is not from another mother. We're actually brothers, Louis.
What? Scandal.
We're just going back and forth. So we're brothers now.
Federated Learning, a therapeutic for Ails digital health. This is actually an interesting article that I saw. So essentially, Federated Learning is trying to solve the privacy problem related to passing on sensitive data between third parties. Let me give you kind of an example, a healthcare example. That was the main topic of this article. So we have tons of healthcare data, right? So every time that you go to a hospital, you go to the doctor and you want to get an MRI, a CT scan, an X-ray, every time you're prescribed medicine, all of that is actually going to a database, right? And there's billions upon billions of data points that are generated every year about your health. Now, on the other side of that, we have a ton of tech companies that like Apple and Google, and some that specialize, specifically in health, that are always working on these ML models, these machine learning models, to mine data like this. But here's the fundamental problem. So if you're a hospital, you can't exactly share that sensitive information with these third parties. And sometimes there are agreements which allow you to. So for example, if the data is anonymized, but we know very well now that even if you have anonymized data, if you take one data set, you take another data set from somewhere else, you can actually de-anonymize the data if you try hard enough. And there's actually companies that specialize in doing this, which is kind of scary. So the solution to this problem is something called, the proposed solution to this problem is something called federated learning. And the idea is that you actually never take the data away from these hospitals or these doctors. What you do is that you actually get them to train the ML models, the machine learning models locally in hospitals. And then whatever the model's formula turns out to be, that's what you pass on to those research organizations. And essentially, you're getting these mini formulas from all over the place, from hospitals all over the country or the world. And then you basically take all of these mini models and you essentially make them into this one kind of big supermodel. So will it work? Who knows, right? The idea seems sound in principle because a model is just a formula, so you're not really passing on information. Now you're just passing on the formula, the weights that are associated with that formula. But maybe somebody can figure out a way to actually even break that, right? That's not outside the realm of possibility. To give you an even deeper example, right? So imagine you work at Google and you wanted to do a study on who's got the hottest bum in the world. I mean, why would you even go through that study? Because it's Yusuf, of course. But just play along. Maybe you do want to do that. Well, you essentially would have to get data on all of the bums that are coming through your hospital. You're creating.
Needs to stop. This needs to stop. You need to. This needs to stop.
That predicts which one is the hottest bum, and then you pass on all of those formulas up to Google or Apple or whatever. They put all those models together, and they have that super model, which is of course Yusuf. Back to you, Yusuf.
So in talking to Luai, I realized how much I wish I can go back to high school where you could not say things like this in front of a group of people. But Luai obviously has no shame and doesn't care. So I apologize on his behalf to all of you.
I unapologize.
Kurt, like, anyways, so quickly, before we run out of time, November's edition of Patch Tuesday included. Oh, I also wanted. Sorry, I'm gonna go back because Andrew, I think it was, told me what WERMGREXC stands for, which was. Let me. I want to find it. I want to make sure I give credit and I don't lie. Windows Error Reporting Manager. So there is that. If you didn't know, now you know. Yeah. So it released 17. There was 112 issues in the patch, and 17 of them were listed as critical. One of the more important ones was CVE 2020-17087, which was listed as important, but the only reason it was listed as important, not critical, was because it was a privilege escalation flaw. So you would need to combine that with another vulnerability and able to actually exploit the vulnerability. Unfortunately, a Google researcher described witnessing this patch recently with another Google vulnerability, CVE 2020-1599, and it was used. They were used together to compromise a Windows user. It doesn't go into more details about that, but that's that. The article also talks about how this time's patches were a lot more sparse in their explanations. The reason to them being that sparse was because they're trying to align with something called CVSS, which stands for Common Vulnerability Scoring System. They want to align with that because they want their format to align with other major software vendors. A lot of people are pissed off at this and not happy about it because you're not able to see the data or the information or the explanations that you normally would. So depends on your stance. Could be good, could be bad, but that's that. I want to mention that Luai is a poet. If you didn't hear me announce this before, he's a poet. So if you're in the game for rapping, you like reading, you like anything, you like anything, you hit Luai up because he likes that kind of stuff. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening to me and Luai's shenanigans. I apologize again on his behalf because he is very childish. Back to you, Kurt.
Stand
not.
by everything that I've done.
I don't. Not important. Back to Kurt.
Awesome. Perfect news segment, guys. It couldn't have gotten better.
Kurt, tell me we didn't kill the time. Look, it's 7:33.
Time's great.
And-
Sounds great.
Yeah.
You did. I love you. Awesome. So on to our next segment, memory lane buffer overflow, presented by me and Jem.
Wow, definitely one of the most entertaining news roundups I've ever seen. I don't know about you guys, but that was unreal. Either way, thanks a lot for sticking with us. So yeah, this is a brand new segment. We were kind of thinking, we've had a ton of technical talks on sessions, which there's nothing wrong with it, obviously, but we never really talk about the history or the culture or any of the events other than the news roundup, obviously, of all these things that we talk about. So we thought about this new segment called Memory Lane, where we'll kind of pick a vulnerability for the evening or whatever, and we'll talk about the historical background and the cultural significance, that kind of thing. Just keep in mind, this isn't it's not supposed to be a technical, tutorial how-to kind of thing. But that being said, we'll definitely provide some really technical documents and videos for you to check out on your own time. But yeah, for this talk, it's going to be more of like a historic kind of, smooth sailing kind of talk. So sweet, kick back and enjoy. Memory lane buffer overflow.
Thank you, Jem. Okay, so before we dive down the memory lane, I guess we want to call it, I want to give a very brief and simple buffer overflow explanation. First, what is a buffer? To put it simply, it's a region of memory storage used to temporarily store some data. So for example, a buffer could take a password entry before moving the data elsewhere. Now, when we talk about an overflow or a buffer overflow, imagine I were to put a lot more data than just my password. If there was no sanitization done, or in this case, meaning my input was not checked to see if it fits in the constraints of the buffer size, we could potentially break the boundary of the buffer and inject code into an overflow area. So that's a very simple explanation of a buffer overflow. But now you have a rough idea of what it is. Let's take it down memory lane all the way back to 1972, 10 years after Jem was born.
Yeah, so right around the time that I was, just a child, this document called the Computer Security Technology Planning Study got created. And essentially this document was something that was made for the US Air Force. It's pretty much the birthplace of what we consider the buffer overflow now. It's the first ever concrete description of what this vulnerability is. Yeah, it's unreal. This document was really major at the time. It was written way before, your Windows is, or your Linux, or Java, or Python. It really is like early on. This is definitely before computers were a household item. Definitely keep that in mind. It was essentially just a security framework for the Air Force, and it was written with the major languages of that era in mind. So if you read through this document, which we'll provide a link, I definitely recommend that you do. It's going to be all about, it's going to revolve around Fortran and BASIC, basically. And it covered a ton of stuff, a huge list of stuff, which I'm not going to be able to cover. But again, if you check it out, you'll see it. A small sample of that stuff is, transaction systems and networks, security frameworks for software development, malicious users, kernel design, data management. Like I said, pretty much whatever you see in kind of modern computing, it was covered at a fundamental level back in 1972. So that's fine and dandy, but you're probably wondering, cool, why does this matter? Well, like I said, this is the first ever mentioning of what a buffer overflow is. Within this document, you see these two highlighted paragraphs. These are literally in history, the fruition of buffer overflow as a concept. If you actually read these paragraphs, you won't even see the term buffer overflow because it didn't exist as a hard and fast concrete concept, right? This is just explaining what those vulnerabilities were at the time. Definitely an unreal document. Strongly recommend you guys check it out.
Cool. Thank you, Jem. Moving forward a decade and a bit, we reached the Morris worm. So if you've been second semester, you might have heard of this. So basically, a Morris worm was the first, it says virus, but it's actually, it's both a virus and a worm. It's malware, I guess you call it. But yeah, it was a worm because it spread through the internet. It was a virus because it kind of crashed computers. But yeah, it's the first publicly known exploit of a buffer overflow. It gets its name from Robert Morris. As you can see here, he was a grad student at Cornell University. And his goal with writing this program was to see if such a program was even possible. And just a quick reminder, as I said before, a worm is malware that spreads through a network. So he used 3 vulnerabilities to kind of exploit, or rather, he exploited 3 main vulnerabilities to try to get his worm to spread. The first one was, let me see, RSH and REXEC. These are network services. They're essentially network services that allowed remote command interpreters. The vulnerability with these servers was mostly through weak passwords or lack of passwords in a trusted network that people tended to set up. The second one was the finger service. This is actually the first known use of a buffer overflow. So finger service requests and sends information about users. So when the finger server would request information, Morris would send back data that would cause a buffer overflow along with malicious code to take advantage of that specific exploit. But since I already kind of explained what buffer overflows are, I'm going to move on to another part of the Morris worm, the send mail debug mode. So we're going to go down a little story. So imagine Yusuf, it's 1988. You didn't buy, but you just got access to a brand spanking new Intel 386. And you want to see what this bad boy can do. So you want to run all this software, you send mail, you're like, send mail, I love sending mail, I want to use the send mail, right? So you download the binaries. You're going through the configuration, and as you're configuring, it says, "Do you want to compile with feature 1?" You're like, "Yeah, I love feature 1." Feature 2, feature 2 is my favorite. Feature 3, why not? Feature 4. Me and feature 4 go way back. So you're just spamming the Y button, and then it says, "Do you want to have debug mode?" And you're like, "Well, I've pressed Y to everything so far, so why not continue doing that?" So you compile with debug mode, and Yusuf, unfortunately, you got. That debug mode is a way that the Morris worm actually gets in. It allows for a backdoor into a system. So there we go. Okay, so a lot of computers had at least one of these vulnerabilities, and as a prank, Morris decided to head over to MIT and release it there to try to fool people into thinking that it originated from there. And the worm, it spread like wildfire. However, there was also another side effect. A mistake in the code that ignored a computer's infection state caused the worm to replicate itself over and over again in the same system, thus resulting in like a denial of service attack of that system. So it's essentially a virus. It caused computer systems to overload and crash. And the resulting damages from that cost between $100,000 and $10 million. No one really is 100% sure. And Morris's involvement resulted in the first conviction under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And funnily enough, in 2003, Morris went on to become a tenured professor at MIT.
Awesome. Sweet. So, all right. So far we've defined what a buffer overflow is. We've talked about its first ever emergence, and it even got exploited at a pretty major event in computer science. In terms of the computer science history, it was a really major event, the Morris worm. But at this point, nobody really knows what a buffer overflow is, right? Unless if you're an academic or unless if you're really, really in the field. It's not like you're going to be a hobbyist computer user and actually know what the buffer overflow is, right? Well, luckily, this awesome article that I'm about to talk about essentially gave the community one of the greatest explanations of what the buffer overflow is. And it basically ensured that the buffer overflow would go on to become one of the most important tools in the toolbox of any exploit developer out there. Now, before I go on, I want to mention that there were earlier works about the buffer overflow written about a year before this. Hacking legend Mudge, who's a member of the Cult of the Dead Cow hacking group, wrote this unreal article. Again, very informative. He actually got input from the author of this article. But this one that we're about to talk about is widely credited as kind of being the article to bring buffer overflows to the spotlight. So this hacker, Aleph1, who I'm just going to wait because this ASCII art is killing me every time. It's just mesmerizing. This hacker by the name of Aleph1, real name is Elias Levy, was super active in the community in the 90s. Like I said, he helped out Mudge with his article as well. This guy wrote an article in 96 called Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit for Frack Ezine. And if you don't know what Frack is, it's probably one of the oldest running hacker publications in the world. It's the origin of not just this, but so many influential articles in the community. Completely free, by the way. So definitely check it out at, I think, frack.org. Really, really cool stuff. So anyways, this article it gives one of the most comprehensive explanations of
your mic's cutting out a little bit.
Oh, uh-oh. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Hey, try continuing and see if it fixes itself.
Sweet. Let me bring that sensitivity down a bit. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. It was just
it was cutting out?
Yeah.
Is it better now? Can you hear me better?
I think so.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Well, okay, so this article is, like I said, it gives one of the most comprehensive explanations of how a buffer overflow works. Aleph1 assumed a little bit of basic C familiarity, a little bit of assembly familiarity, but when I say a little bit, I really mean just that. The article goes like deep into explaining everything from the ground up. He talks about what stacks are, what shellcode is, how to write your own custom exploits, how to find buffer overflows. He includes two huge appendices where he outlines custom shellcode for all the different architectures of that time. But I know what you're thinking. Jem, Kurt, this is all fine and dandy, but you guys keep talking about these old school exploits or old school articles. We get it. In the 20th century, security wasn't important, but we're in the 21st century now. So clearly I hope buffer overflows aren't still a big thing, right? I mean, we've gotten a lot smarter. We got huge, academic institutions dedicated to training the next level of security pros. No way this is still a problem, right? Well, what if I told you that almost 30 years since it was first discovered, buffer overflows are still a major threat?
So yeah, the Code Red worm in 2001 was the first, instance of a buffer overflow costing billions of dollars in damages. And it was sort of a big deal in the early 2000s. One could argue that Code Red could be listed alongside coconut oil and petroleum products as one of the primary exports to come out of the Philippines in 2001. So basically, Code Red is a worm that was named Code Red after the drink that the researchers were consuming during their analysis and discovery of the worm. And as you can imagine, this is a direct representation of exactly what happened. The worm exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability in the web server Microsoft ISS. And what's especially wild about this worm was that its behavior was dictated by the time of the month. So here's my incredible calendar. So the first 19 days of the month, the Code Red dedicated its purpose to spreading. It would generate a random list of IPs to start probing them in an attempt to spread. And then in between the dates of the 20th to the 27th of each month, it would launch a DOS attack on a list of fixed IP addresses, one of which was actually the White House web server. And then from the 28th to the end of the month, it would just lay dormant and stop all activity. All of what I said, it was strictly for Code Red version 2 because, there were actually 2 versions released 1 week apart. The biggest difference between the 2 versions is the first one used a static seed to generate random numbers, and the second version used a random seed. And even though those changes seem minor, it made it so that at its peak, Code Red version 2 was infecting 2,000 hosts a minute and is believed to cause billions of dollars in damages, infecting over 350,000 hosts. Yeah.
Unreal. So, I mean, as you guys can see, between the mid 90s and up to now, a ton of different. These are just the big ones that we're talking about, but there was obviously a bunch of smaller or mid-scale exploits that have also came and went. And buffer overflows over time became one of the most well-known vulnerabilities ever. But there's no way we can finish this talk without talking about what most of us would consider to be one of the most impactful events of security and modern computing, especially that of involving the buffer overflow as the main part of the exploit. This didn't happen until 40 years after the initial discovery of buffer overflows, and this is known around the community as Heartbleed. I do have to mention before I keep going that Heartbleed it's not like a traditional buffer overflow, and you'll kind of understand what I mean by that in just a second, but it's still a buffer overflow, I guess. You'll understand what I mean. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is probably one of the most well-known bugs of all time. At its peak, there really wasn't a single company that you could think about that was either too big or too secure or too safety conscious that could be safe from this bug. Google, Facebook, major banks, government institutions, you name it, they pretty much got hit. Funnily enough, Amazon actually didn't get hit, but Amazon Web Services did. So whatever sites were hosted on AWS, Amazon indirectly got hit. It was a big deal. So like I said, although Heartbleed wasn't a buffer overflow bug in the traditional sense, for reasons that you'll see in just a second, I still think it's worth mentioning because the entire bug relied on accessing parts of the memory buffer that it wasn't authorized to, right? So Heartbleed exploited something called OpenSSL, which, if you don't know, it's essentially it ensures that data being communicated over the internet, mainly through the browser, is encrypted, right? During each, I'm going to call them call and responses between the client and the server, you could say that there's going to be 2 parts of the communication, right? We can say that part A is kind of where the encrypted data is being communicated. So your passwords, your emails, your messages, or what have you. And we could say that part B it's called the heartbeat, right? This part B is kind of where, while above us, the information is being communicated, we could say below us, the server or the client is saying to the server, hey, are you still awake? And the client's saying, the server's saying, yeah, I am still awake. But in this kind of communication, it doesn't just start and end with saying, hey, are you awake? There's also something called the magic word, right? So the client will say something like, hey, server, are you still there? Here's a magic word, cake, and it's 4 characters long. The server will respond with something like, oh yeah, I'm here, and your magic word was cake. And it'll stop right at the end of that last letter in the word cake, because that's 4 characters. But the problem with this is, the server is just too trusting of the client, right? It doesn't assume that the client can be malicious. So in this attack, what's happening is the client is saying something like, hey, server, are you still here? The magic word is cake, and it's 64,000 characters. And I'm saying 64,000 characters because that's believed to be the approximate limit of this kind of communication, or this bug, I guess, in this case. What will happen, though, is the server will respond with, yeah, I'm still here. Your magic word is cake, and your username is Paul. Your password is 1234. Your SIN number is etc. Your email address is this, and it'll kind of keep going on and on and on, right? And the kicker to all of this is that there really is no limit to how many times you can make this request, right? You can get 64,000 character blocks of information as many times as you want, and I don't know about you, but that's an unreal amount of information. You could do a lot of bad things with that. So you can probably tell from what I just explained, why this isn't a traditional buffer overflow. In case it was kind of too quick, I'll just break it down. In this exploit, you're not really writing past the authorized buffer. You're not writing past the buffer into memory where you're not authorized to. You're actually retrieving that information, accessing it, and you're not authorized to do so. This is actually called a buffer overread, but it's a direct ancestor of the same exploit or the same vulnerability that we've been talking about the whole night. So definitely really cool. But essentially, what I'm trying to show by talking about all these events, and Heartbeat specifically, but all these events is even after 1972, when this bug kind of got discovered, it's been almost 50 years, and we're still hearing about buffer overflow being an issue, right? And Heartbleed took the world by storm when it happened, and I guarantee you, I can't 100%, but I have a hard time believing that it'll be the last time we hear about exploits of this magnitude that utilize buffer or memory, we could say memory bugs, right? I just read a wild article by Portswigger, or not an article, it was an interview where they interviewed the famous bounty hunter Tommy DeVos. I don't know if you guys follow him on Twitter. I do, but anyways, he said as long as people are the ones writing code, there's going to be insecure code. And even though I'm at the infancy of my InfoSec journey, I definitely will keep that in mind throughout the rest of this trek, and I recommend you guys do too.
Okay, everybody, welcome back from the break. Up next, we have Breaking the Red Team and Incident Response from our two guest speakers, Kenny Hartlub and Andrew Major. Just a quick, brief introduction I have here. Kenny Hartlub, hope I'm saying that correctly, is an associate consultant at FireEye Mandiant's Red Team. He's been in the security field for 4 years as a penetration tester and a red teamer. And Kenny graduated from this program in 2018, and he's very passionate about learning and growing in his field. Andrew Major is also a consultant at FireEye's Mandiant Incident Response Team. He graduated from this program as well in 2018. After not having an idea of what to do at the end of year 3, Forensics Lab accepted him for co-op, and now with 2 years on Mandiant's IR team, he's been fighting against apt groups. He's here to encourage others to get into the same rewarding field. So thank you guys, and take it away.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Kenny Hartlub, and with me is Andrew Major. And yes, we're going to first preface this that this talk is going to be our opinions and our opinions alone. We are not here to represent Mandiant in the capacity for this talk. We just took their slide deck because it's awesome. And yeah, we're going to basically discuss what you can do to use your time now if you want to break into these two positions, using our experiences and what we learned along the way to help get you there. So a brief introduction about ourselves. I graduated, yes, in 2018. Me and Andrew actually did graduate together. Before I graduated, I was already working as a penetration tester part-time and during co-op, and then full-time at Access Networks. It's a great company. And from there, after graduation and a year or so later, after different certification attempts and such, I moved on to another company called Cybersecurity, another fantastic one. And then now, since then, I've been at FireEye Mandiant on their red team.
And my name's Andrew. Again, graduated with Kenny in 2018. And since we're talking about our career paths, I really did want to bring up when we started this is when I was in school and even getting close to graduation, I didn't have a clue where I wanted to go with the knowledge that I had gained so far. Well, had been in that position, so you can be successful after that. And I just wanted to be able to bring that to you guys along with our individual paths as we go along. So after graduating, again, I went to KPMG, their forensics lab, doing a lot of types of forensics that you learn in class in Sheridan. But it wasn't something I enjoyed too much. But there was the possibility of specializing further into incident response, and I was able to do that. And I've been doing that for 2 years now at Mandiant.
Yes, that's the big thing that we hope you all can actually take out of this is what we didn't know back then, and where we didn't know what we wanted to do. I probably did more so over Andrew, and this will hopefully, on my side at least, will hopefully give you guys a better direction if you choose to go that route, or if you are still unknown, as was Andrew. So the agenda for today's talk is going to be both for Red Team and for Incident Response. It's going to be split up. So on my side, it's just going to be talking about some of the differences and practices done for both for penetration testing and red teaming, because there's always going to be people that aren't sure which one is which and how to get into which field, and then the path that you should take as a red teamer, and that does apply to penetration testing. A lot of it is going to apply to both. Especially for that first co-op job or that first internship, or just any job really after graduation as well. And then after that, what to do during that throughout your time, as well as just an example of what I did.
And I won't speak too much to this. These are just the main areas that I'll be talking about. And it's really after Kenny talks about red team, I'll take over with the blue side and give you some pointers there and how I went about it and what I think might help some people who are interested in going down that way.
Excellent. So the path you want to take to get on the red team, we got to break things up first. You got to know the difference between a penetration test and a red team. big thing. And most interview questions, that's the first thing that does get asked, especially, well, for the red team side. Same thing on the penetration side. You will be asked between what's a vulnerability assessment, what's a penetration test. So those are very, very high level questions. And this is by no means a definitive list of what the differences are. It's just kind of brief, but I like to see penetration testing as being a grunt, and red teaming is as you are special operations, because one side you can be as loud as you want in most scenarios. You don't always have to be like that, but in most scenarios it doesn't really matter about stealth and not alerting their, or not being worried about alerting their SOC and such. However, red teaming is very much stealth required. You don't want to get caught because you are effectively simulating adversary threats. And there's usually no scope when it comes to red teaming. There can be if it's like, maybe no physical parts, or maybe there's no, lock picking and such for that kind of physical, or maybe social engineering. You can't really go after certain key players. In most of the cases, though, in many of them that I've been on, there's never been really a scope. It's just, here's your target. COVID times, especially, it's like you're not doing anything physical. It doesn't matter. They're not going to be at the office anyways. But penetration testing, though, is usually heavily scoped. It's usually, it might be broken into different parts. You might have an external and internal, a web app, and that's it. There's never really, going to be an overall encompassing one, unless if it's gearing up for next year's red team, essentially. Another thing with penetration testing, that it's only up to like 1 to 4 weeks, depending on the project. And however, that can be broken up too. You might have 1 to 4 weeks to do an internal assessment for a massive client, or maybe you have 2 weeks to do a web app. So that could actually extend the penetration test up to 6 weeks, but those are just separately, to across. Red teaming, however, it's very much 4 to 6 weeks or more. I've seen it last for many more months, and they usually entail several mission objectives as well that go along during that time. And it's all about being quiet. So you're going to be low and slow versus, high and mighty on the grunt side. So penetration testing also has a lot of vulnerability analysis. What that means is that you're going to be trying to identify everything that you can, and then exploiting that. You also have the whole no automated scanning for red teaming, because that will get you caught. I have seen it where you can get away with it on clients that might not have a lot of detection or monitoring in place, but you really only do that after you find that out. And even then, it's usually after you complete all your other mission objectives, because then, it's like, who cares? But most of the time, it's no automated scanning. You might have scanners, you might have parsers, you might have that kind of tool sets, but you're not like going to be running Nessus against an external range. You're not going to be running that in internal range. You're not going to be running NetSpark or any like these automated tools that will be loud and obnoxious. The other side of this is with those mission objectives, is that what I mean by mission objectives, it is, you have an objective to obtain domain admin on the network, or you have an objective to exfiltrate personally identifiable information. We see that all the time, or just accessing databases to PII. Maybe you're going up against a massive corporation that has research ties into other corporations, and they have an entire database of that somewhere. You don't know where it is, but you got to find it. You got to exfiltrate data without getting caught. So those are the kind of mission objective parts. Versus a penetration test, you might have some exfiltration done as part of the penetration test, but normally that's done on a red team. And the other side of this is that you are testing those vulnerabilities, right? Specifically to that scope. Versus red teaming, without a scope, you can really go after the hardware. You can go after the people. You can, exploit the procedures that are in place. Maybe you get in and you don't have a pivot box to get onto, but you do know that a server admin who responds to their emails all the time does. And the only reason why you know that is because you were able to password spray, compromise a low tier user, a low privileged user that is actively talking to DevOps or a server admin of somewhere in their emails because you logged in because they don't have MFA. Well, now you can exploit that whole trust relationship between those two people. Maybe you can get them to, browse to an internal fake server that you have set up because you compromised a box, or maybe you can get them to go to your external website and check it out. Maybe they can open up a Word document or a payload of some kind. So there's lots of different tactics that a red teamer uses. And penetration testing, you're usually given a white or black gray box, which is pretty much, more information about it. You don't know, you might know some or not. You might have credentials or not. Red teaming, a lot of them are assume breach or compromise types as well. Some corporations don't really want to do social engineering, but they might do it after the fact. Maybe they'll give you access to one of their internal boxes, or they'll launch a payload on one of their internal boxes and they'll just say go. And penetration testing, people will say that it keeps going after compromise, and it does. But normally you notify the client immediately, like, hey, we got compromise onto this. Can we proceed, kind of thing. And that's usually the best practice, because you don't know sometimes what those assets go to. Unless if the client doesn't care, then you're good to go. And they even specify that in the SOW, the status of work, or the statement of work. But in most cases, if I get in through an external, let's say I get in most cases it's through a Citrix, and I do a Citrix breakout from their environment onto the underlying Citrix farm system, I will notify them immediately, and usually it will stop there, and then it might turn into an internal. So it just depends, and then from there it just gets routed up to the chain. Red team, it will leverage the compromise. It normally, during like status update or something that you have with the client weekly, if those are in the statement of work, you will tell them that, like, hey, we compromised this, we will be exfiltrating this, just to keep your point of contact in the loop. And a lot of times you don't tell them until it's over. And that way they can go back and look at their detection mechanisms and tweak. So
Yeah,
enough about.
Kenny,
Oh, sorry.
Put a comment on that last one. Kenny's given you a lot of detail about how each of those things break down. But one of the biggest takeaways you can have if you're graduating and trying to get into red teaming, or trying to go from a pen testing job to a red teaming job, is to be able to articulate the differences in between these two to the person you're doing an interview with. They're going to want to know that you know the actual differences and can explain what they are in either a high level or on the technical level. Okay, so it's usually one of the first questions that gets popped during those interviews.
Yeah. I wish I had another slide that said penetration testing versus a vulnerability test, because I used to get that all the time. I used to get asked that all the time. And I'm just going to tell you guys just briefly, just real quick, that a vulnerability assessment is just, you are looking at what they have, and then you're telling them what it could be, vulnerable to, based on patch levels and such, or procedures that they might have in place that could be exploited. Versus a penetration test is like, you are actively exploiting those vulnerabilities. You are going to prove, you're going to validate them. And that's where penetration test comes into play. So speaking of penetration testing, it is definitely required to know before you get in any kind of red team role. It's going to be very difficult for you guys to just jump right into a red team role if you don't have any experience at all into penetration testing. And that's because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a lot of the different applications that, or the different types. And I list them here, but some of them aren't even listed here. I've had assessments against IoT devices. I've had assessments against specific endpoints themselves, like just on an endpoint. Like, can you privilege escalate from this where you are right now? Can you do it from this? Or here's a Linux box, go. And you don't know anything about it. Or here's a Docker image, go. And you're going to see a pattern into this discussion where you're going to be learning a lot on the fly, because nothing can fully prepare you for what you might get assessed or what you might have to assess. So another big thing is that you got to know the difference, like I said before, vulnerability versus an exploit. If you can identify a vulnerability and then exploiting it, it's two completely different things. Saying something is vulnerable versus saying something is exploitable, very different. And showing that by keeping up to date is very important as well. So if you know that you're on an engagement and you identify a WebLogic instance on their internal network, and you kind of went over it, you wouldn't have known that there's a recent CVE that was just released and publicly available exploit out there, because you're keeping up with the 0 days of new research, the tactics that adversaries are taking, which is all encompassing a good penetration tester. Another thing is that you're going to be developing your own methodology as you go. It's huge, because not everyone's high level methodology is going to be perfect for everyone else. I have my own. I have other friends that have their own, and you'll develop your own in time. Another thing about being a penetration tester is that you have an arsenal of tool sets that you're going to be very intimate with, because you're going to know them and because you're going to get used to using them. And report writing. Before you even get into red teaming, you've got to know how to report write. Before you even get into penetration testing, you really have to prove that you can also write reports as well. That's usually one of the first tests I see every new penetration tester get at a new firm. They might even be an experienced penetration tester. It doesn't matter. They start their new job, and it's usually they're either tested before they start the job, where the manager or CEO of the company will be like, "Hey, I want you to do an assessment against us." It's just their company, because whatever the fallout happens, it's against them. It doesn't matter. And then the assessor has to write a report, and then they review it, and then they can really ascertain, okay, does this person able to articulate what they saw? Are they able to identify stuff? Did they maybe miss some stuff, or is their wording kind of out of whack? Do they know the difference between a vulnerability and an exploit is, or a penetration test is? The report writing is what goes to the client, so having that down is extremely important. Being able to come across with a high level summary for the executives down to a technical level for the people that have to go in and remediate, or for them to go and implement detections. Like, for instance, maybe you were able to exploit that Citrix issue, and you have a remediation to actually implement MFA so they don't get onto that, or fix up the Internet Explorer breakout onto the actual Citrix system. You have to be able to articulate how they can fix that quickly and effectively. Okay, so we're going to get into... Whoops, sorry,
Kenny. For people who don't quite know where they want to go yet, when we say client, it's usually people usually think consulting. It's not going to be necessarily the case. If you join a company and you're part of their pen testing team, your client is the rest of the company. So you still need to be able to put forth those reports in a very professional manner. And unfortunately, that is a large amount of time that you spend on those.
Yes, absolutely. I know some great guys that are penetration testers that are specific for their company. It is extremely important for them as well to keep up to date. But their client is their company. So what it's like being a red teamer is, one, like I said before, you always keeping up to date. You're always learning. The adversary tactics that they drop all the time that, FireEye learns a lot about for sure, but other companies learn a lot about as well. And they publicly disclose a lot of that information. It's very important to keep up to date on what the new tactics are, because you never know until you're in that situation. So being prepared is extremely important. Another thing is detail-oriented work, because you are always going to be taking notes for that report. And you have to know what the steps you took to get there and what occurred. Maybe you couldn't delete a payload that you successfully uploaded to the client's machine. That's extremely important, because that could be a backdoor for them eventually. Now, if you went and you took the practices that I won't get into here because that's not the discussion for this talk, but you can save yourself a lot of that. But keeping detail-oriented work is extremely important, down to uploads, downloads, notes taken, everything. Thorough reconnaissance. A lot of people do penetration tests or internal assessments, vulnerability assessments, whatever it is, that they don't do proper reconnaissance. They'll just jump into scanning IPs, but they didn't do any OSINT. I'm a huge believer in doing OSINT no matter what the assessment is, because you're going to get far more insight into what you're operating on if you did that reconnaissance. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're on the internal side or you're doing a web application, whatever it is, and you just see a bunch of computer names or system names or user names. You don't know who these people are because you didn't do your OSINT. If you actually scraped LinkedIn, if you went on Google and you did some Google dorking, you maybe looked in their GitHubs and their GitLabs and whatever could be publicly accessible. Maybe there's a software dev that has his own personal GitHub account, and they have accidentally pushed some secret keys to their personal GitHub account that goes to their company assets. If you do thorough reconnaissance, you'll be able to piece together things that you wouldn't normally have seen otherwise. So it's extremely important. Penetration testing at a slower pace really helps describe what a red team is, because you are going slower, low and tactical, low and you are thinking, you are reviewing, you are planning out the next step. So the what another big thing is programming and scripting, because you're going to be automating some tasks. Maybe you come up against a web form that can be password sprayed, and you don't have a default template, so you just got to script up something quickly in Python or whatever. Or maybe you are reviewing their source code because you were able to get access to it, and now you found a bug, maybe a buffer overflow. Like was discussed, maybe, which is extremely still popular to find, like they discussed in earlier talk. It is, but there's lots of other bits and pieces that you can identify. You will learn that actually later on in your other courses, how to identify that kind of stuff in source code. And doing this kind of work can be stressful because of the working hours, or because of the tasks that need to be taken. I don't know how many times, no, it still happens. Every time I do a social engineering engagement, whether it be physical or email or vishing or whatever it is, I get nervous and it's stressful. I get what I call buck fever, because it's what my dad taught me when I'd go hunting. Like, I just get so, like, my adrenaline's going, I'm nervous, I'm shaky. Maybe this will work, it's the same thing when a deer would walk out in front of me, kind of thing. Like, I just get like so shaky, like, oh my goodness, like this is my moment, and you don't want to mess it up because you only get one shot in a lot of cases, so it can be stressful. You have to be flexible on working hours. I'm on an engagement right now. Right now it's my 8 a.m. I woke up at about 6. I'm on a night shift right now, and that is normally not something that I would have to do. But in previous work sets at other companies, I had to do that all the time, and I don't mind it. I like that. Now, you don't always have to do that, obviously, but there might be another occasion where you launch a social engineering campaign or a phishing campaign, let's say, that was to launch payloads. You send it around lunch hour, no one clicked. And then it's around 6-7 o'clock. You check, and you check on your Cobalt Strike or whatever C2 that you're using, and you notice you got a callback, and so now you have access onto that user's machine. Well, you got to be quick. On a red team, you got to be quick because you got to get that persistence. You don't want to lose access. So it's extremely important to be flexible with your working hours, because even though you clocked out at 5, that doesn't mean anything. All right, you got to keep going. You got to keep pressing to get into that network. You got to keep going to get that persistence and evade whatever that they have. On a penetration test, you might be able to try it again, you might be able to simulate it again, might be able to get them to do it again, whatever it is, whoever your POC is. But on a red team, it's usually one shot and that's it. I like the gifts. This is great. There are so many job opportunities after this as well, which I don't think I need to get into. But of course, if you can be a red teamer, you can identify source code, you can read source code, you can identify threats. So there's a whole landscape, as well as IR. I mean, you can go into IR easily because you know what the adversaries are going to use. So what will help you on your path to getting on a red team or getting into penetration testing? So in Sheridan, or any other real program really that actually offers this kind of stuff, networking classes, programming classes, operating systems classes, your ethics class, and your ethical hacking, quote unquote, class, because these classes are especially operating systems, networking, and programming. I would say and ethics for sure, really all of them. But those 3 top classes there give you a much better insight as to what you're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Operating systems for sure, as well. Like I could go into these ones, but I won't. But those ones are very important. Outside of Sheridan, though, that they don't teach you, unfortunately, at the time when I went, I don't know if this has changed, but systems network administration from a Active Directory standpoint, or even just managing servers, I unfortunately didn't get that experience there, but doesn't mean you can't. Okay, there's lots of other places that you can do that at. There's so many write-ups. CTFs, testing labs, attempting certifications, those kind of things are very important if you want to really break into the industry to try out. CTFs especially, but even then, I'm not a CTF guy. I made a lot of labs, and I was on a lot of Volt Hub stuff. Following people on Twitter, there's too many people on Twitter. So there is also a lot of people on YouTube. Unfortunately, however, I will just comment real quick that there's a lot of content creators that are on YouTube that I follow. And some of those and others that aren't even like them but might take advantage of the situation is that they do charge money to teach you guys. And I'm all about learning. And if that's what it takes for you to help learn, that's great. But I will preface with, you guys can learn that on your own. There's lots of other people out there that allows you to do that. And it gives you that opportunity to teach yourself, which is a lot of this job. You will be teaching yourself. There's no one that's going to be there to tell you how to do an internal. There's no one that's going to be there to tell you how to do unconstrained delegation attack. You know, like it's something that you have to learn on your own, that you're not going to get in a lot of other places. So you might as well start learning on your own now. And it's just the unfortunate side effect. Another thing is that if you're going to follow people on Twitter and you're not used to it, break it up. Okay, just follow people that are what it is that you're trying to learn from. And whether it's Active Directory, follow a lot of people that just do Active Directory security stuff. If you're learning how to do PowerShell stuff, follow a bunch of people that do offensive PowerShell stuff, and just follow their tweets. Okay, and you can also break it up into multiple Twitter accounts. I have a social engineering account. I have an exploitation account that does a lot of in-memory stuff and a lot of what's it called? A lot of low-level Windows internal stuff. So I follow a lot of people on that on a separate account, and then I have my main, social media account, really that I just follow everybody because I just want to see all sorts of stuff. So a lot of that though can be a little bit of an information overload. But there's some great people here that you can follow as well. Bug bountiers are huge right now, which I'll get into later. So a little bit of extras. When you're going through this interview process, in order for you to get that position, you might as well get yourself into the habit now, that when you're going through those, you are showing and proving that you have an interest, right? So because if you say you have an interest, it's not really enough if you can't really prove it, right? So if you have some red team or penetration testing knowledge, it's very important. I've had people hit me up all the time and they don't really know a lot, and I wish I could impart all my knowledge onto them, but I can't, and that takes time to learn. So doing that on your own is very, very important. Keeping up to date, like I said several other times, extremely important, because I've been asked in interviews, name 3 recent exploits that came out this year. And it doesn't matter what kind, right? But I can name 10 off the top of my head that happened. Like, it was just an insane year during COVID times, and people just didn't have any other time other than to exploit stuff because they were stuck at home anyway. So it was a great year. Participating in TCTFs, it's not like you need to, but these are just ideas. Okay, I've participated in a few. I'm by no means a pro CTFer, but I always have fun doing them, and I make friends. Attending security meetings and conferences are very important because it shows that you have an active interest as well. Attempting certifications, I've had this down on my resumes where I attempted, and I had like hour logs of how many times I spent in OSCP, how many times I spent in certified red team professional courses. It just shows that I have an active interest in it and that I tried. I failed. Who cares? I'm not going to, hide that from them. Another thing on your resume, not just from the interview, but on the resume, is that you need to have personal interests and try to make them what those points are above. And that's just from my experience. You don't have to take that. You can put in there that you like mountain biking. I like mountain biking, so I put that in there. But I also have other interests as well. I really like attending conferences. I really like DEF CON. I really like doing bug bounties, stuff like that. Another thing is that when you're going through this process, even though you might have learned from some YouTube guys and such, or maybe you learned on Hack the Box and you were in the forums and such, you got to have ethics, guys. You really got to have some good ethics, because that will always come into play. And knowing how to handle data, personal identifiable information especially, or just sensitive data in general. So having ethics is extremely important, and that could keep you out of penetration testing. Lack of working experience certifications could easily keep you out of red teaming as well. It's not at all like definitive, but it is possible. And the reason why that is because a lot of red teaming it really does require you to show your worth as far as, you know, what you were able to accomplish in a penetration test, or maybe they just require it. And some places are like that. So some harsh reality before we get into the next steps of how to prepare yourselves. Okay, just because you have certifications doesn't mean you're going to get a job. All right, knowledge and experience by far, right off the bat. It's extremely important to have that, and you can get that by practicing and failing now, versus when you start going through for those positions and you're caught off guard by a question you just don't know how to answer. Programming helps in every single area of penetration testing, red teaming, and a lot of other places as well, including IR. And that is because not only does it allow you to read code and allows you to make exploitation code, exploit code, it helps you think. Programming really does help you think outside the box. It helps you be constructive and methodological, and also very thinking outside the box in certain situations to get the job done. Just the logic process that your mind can follow with a program is just amazing. I see a lot of red teamers, though, and a lot of penetration testers that don't know any programming, and they still succeed. But they do struggle when those areas do come up, and that's just how it is. Another thing is, not a lot of people are cut out for penetration testing, red teaming. It can be exhausting to keep up to date with things. There's some nights I just go to bed and I open up Twitter, open up my YouTubes, and I'm like, I don't want to do any of this. But I do. I get up in the morning, maybe I'll save just one article. I'll usually read about one article a day, whether that be from Medium, or maybe that's a new bug bounty write-up on HackerOne, some new thing I don't know how to do. I love reading those things because I use them all the time. Knowing how to assess a situation is extremely important, and many people just don't know how to do that because maybe they just can't, grasp the concepts, and maybe that just takes more time. Some people, they'll just run a tool and then that's it. They don't want to do anything else. They don't want to validate anything. They just want to run this tool and that's it. And that's not going to get you anywhere. And that kind of digs into more laziness. I've been on this as well. I've been lazy. Where I thought I was a penetration tester because I ran these tools and then I didn't find anything. And that's not, no, that won't get you very far. You're going to get stuck. You're not going to be able to excel or progressively grow in the field if you just get into this rut of just run tool, generate report, run tool, generate report. That's not at all what this field is about. And so getting that out of your head now will definitely help. Report writing, some people just can't even write reports. I've seen people just not go far because they just don't know how to write a report, or they're lazy, or they miss so many information. So they don't take notes properly. And then they can't prove something. So it's very, very difficult, because even though you turn in that report, doesn't mean that that's the final report. Sometimes they'll come back and they'll argue. And that's very valid, because sometimes you can't prove a vulnerability completely was exploitable. And so you're putting on there so they're aware, but they might come back and be like, well, we don't need multi-factor here because we have certificate-based authentication instead. It's like, okay, you know what? Here you go. You're right. We'll dumb down this from a high to a medium, let's say. Making connections is extremely important, and it's not necessary, but it is extremely important. And the reason why I said that is because you don't have to be social in this field, but you will find other people just like you out there. I don't know how many times I've been in line at talks or just hanging out, and I sit next to people, or even in the airport going to a talk, where I'm nervous and I don't know how to talk to people around me, but I hear people talking about, whether it be Hackfest or DEF CON or whatever it is, Black Hat, right? And we just start, talking and discussing, and I soon learned that they literally know as much as I do, or they don't know as much as I do, or I know nothing. these guys are like God tier. I don't know what this is. So you learn so much from these guys and girls, and it's important to make those connections because you'll never forget them, and you will see other people in your industry miles around that they might know a guy, know a girl that you came across, and having those connections are very, very important. So let's get into what you got to do. So first things first, if you are coming up to your co-op and your second year, first year, whatever it is, all of your summers that you can, if you have time, okay, apply and apply and apply again and keep applying to any kind of IT related role. All right. Even if it's just a part-time job or if it's just a summer job and you're upfront about that, right? It doesn't matter, because if you are in those roles, you will effectively have that experience to put on your resume for later. Okay, when I got in, I had nothing, and I went for an IT role, and it gave me so much more insight as to what I needed to accomplish to become a penetration tester, which I'll get into the exhibit part. While you're applying, you should learn what you don't know, right? Learn how to set up a web server, learn how to protect endpoints, learn what Active Directory is. Windows is extremely important in our field. Learn it. Learn everything you can about it. That doesn't mean you need to, swap your Linux distro on your laptop to a Windows. You don't want to go back to that. I don't either. Okay, we all don't. Okay, but if you love Windows, that's great too. I love Windows, but you don't need to do that. Stick on your Linux because that's important as well. But learning Active Directory, extremely important. Extremely important. Practice for your failing, right? Practice on VulnHub. Practice on Hack the Box. Practice on PortSwigger Academy, Pen Tester Academy. There's some great, amazing apps that you can set up in your own lab with Active Directory, and you can even set up your own personal CTF in some cases. There's even, for IR even, there's a great tool that you can deploy in the cloud, and a lot of things you can actually deploy in the cloud now. It's just amazing what you can do, but you can deploy, and it costs nothing, maybe like $15 a month to deploy Detection Lab if you really want to do some cool stuff. From an IR or red team perspective. And maybe you want to do OWASP stuff. Maybe you want to focus on web application stuff. There's OWASP Juice Shop. Like, this link alone has so many stuff that you can learn from. Another thing is bug bounties. I will only ever tell students to go for bug bounties if they have at least another process in place that helps them effectively enumerate a target for a bug bounty. And that is because labs and certs are going to be more beneficial to you now, because you will likely have more success on labs and certs than you would with bug bounties. And that's because there's other people out there, hundreds, thousands of people that are also starting off and learning and hacking, and they're doing against bug bounties, and they're going to find it before you do. And that might be a little bit demotivating. But it's very important to learn from. So read the write-ups, read or watch the YouTube talks that they have, because there's some great guys and girls out there. So now that you have a position, maybe you're help desk, maybe you're a junior software developer, whatever it is, maybe you're on co-op, maybe you did get a penetration testing co-op, that's awesome. Whatever it is, whatever the role is, and you want to get into this field, you should identify things that normally would be identified on an assessment, right? Maybe you also want to help secure their software development lifecycle, right? They don't have anything. They don't even have code checking. And they don't even have MFA. They don't have vulnerability tests or internal tests. You're an intern. You're literally there to help them. So just do it. See what you can find on their internal network. The other thing is that when you do that, you're going to be improving your resume for any kind of future positions that you have later, right? If maybe this one doesn't work out or you don't want to come back to it, you at least have that there. Like, you helped bolster this company, right? You helped implement vulnerability tests, a web application firewall, whatever it is. You just identified it and then you implemented it. Maybe even BloodHound. Maybe you were just like, hey, can I do an Active Directory audit? And you just run BloodHound on their internal network after you get permission, of course, and everything you have to get permission for, of course. It helps them, because a lot of these companies don't know what any of this stuff is. And you're coming there as an intern, and you're going to blow them away. You need to stay proactive during every process of this. So what I said earlier, learning. practice failing now is extremely important, because you're only going to get those experiences now versus later. And you don't want to be in the situation where your boss is like, hey, I need you to set up an email server, a personal one, so we can start a phishing campaign. And you're like, what? I've never set up an email server before. Just practice it. You don't need to do this anymore, but if you learn the internals of it, you'll understand. Or he wants you to set up a web server to do phishing with, or whatever it is, right? If you learn those important parts now, especially Active Directory, you'll be set up for success later. So, I'll go through some examples of what occurred during my time before Sheridan, after Sheridan, college, just degree, anything really. So I was in the U.S. military as a policeman for 4 years. I had literally had zero technical knowledge. I didn't know what an IP address was. I didn't know what DNS was. I didn't know what a MAC address was until I started. When I applied to Sheridan, they were like, no. Your GPA is way too low from high school. You don't even have the proper math creds. We can't do this. And so I was like, all right, okay. I want to get into this program. What can I do? And they told me what I should do, and that was to take a math course and get a really ridiculously high grade on it. And so I did, and they I reapplied and was accepted. I started in January of 2015, and that went all the way until 2016. And then I got my first summer. It was great. So second year spring came around because it was my first available time coming up. And so I applied everywhere. I was like, I need IT experience if I'm going to break into this field. I want to be a penetration tester. All right. I want to be a red teamer, but at the time there wasn't a lot of information out there. And even as the time as penetration tester, the only thing I knew about was certs. And the only thing I knew also was vulnerability assessments. So I was like, you know what? If I can just do anything anywhere, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to implement something. So I applied to VMware. I applied to this company that was absorbed by MNP. I forget what it's called. I applied to big name companies other than VMware, like Trend Micro and such. And I just didn't get the position, obviously. But especially for like a 3-month thing. But those smaller shops took, like, I actually had interviews with. One of them was an HVAC parts company that took me on, and I was a junior software developer just for 3 months, and that was the term. It was just a 3-month full-time position, and I helped them code in C#. I didn't know any C#. I went through the interview, and they were like, "You know Java?" I was like, "Yes." And they said, "Do you know C#?" I said, "No, but I did know it was an object-oriented language. I can figure it out." And you doing that is extremely important to show them that you can learn on the fly, because a lot of that is penetration testing, learning on the fly. So while I was there, I implemented a web application security, a web application firewall, a security review of their software that they were utilizing, and down to the libraries that they were importing. If there was any bugs that could be in it, we were going through code all the time. We had they were called like those breakout sessions. I don't know what they're called, but I know you learn about it in school. But we had those shops all the time, at least scrub meetings. That's what it's called. You had scrub meetings. And so I was there to go over any kind of parts of the code that could potentially be vulnerable and exploitable. The other thing is that I did internal vulnerability tests. I implemented that. I identified a lot of weaknesses that helped prepare them, because they did receive some stuff like everyone does, but they were able to get by it. I also at the time was like, you know what? I want to be the best I can be. I'm going to go for OSCP. I epically failed it. Like, it was demotivating, because I popped so many boxes on the lab, and I thought, this is it. I can do it. And then I took it, and I might have gotten 1 box on the exam in 24 hours, and you need like 3 or 4 of them. And it was the easiest one. It was a buffer overflow one, right? Buffer overflows, very important. If you can get anything on today's sessions at this whole thing, buffer overflows. Yeah, but it was very demotivating, because I didn't think I was cut out for it. But then that went away when I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to keep trying. And me alone attempting that certification and being at that shop allowed the CIO to come up to me and ask me if I would like to take on the role of their IT security administration. And I was like, wow, like, this is amazing. But I'm in school, so I had to either give up school or that, and I wasn't going to do that. So I passed on it. And then I did apply that fall for another firm And I had it on there. I tried the OSCP. I had 400 hours into it. I didn't pass, but I had all this training material because it was training. OSCP, the PWK, whatever it is, it really helped me learn and to apply that down to report writing. Report writing alone from that helped me because I was given a test, and it was come at me, give me a report. Here's a report template. It wasn't even filled out. It was just a report template of like some bits and pieces, and it was like, I'm going to see what you can do. And that was it. It was just about experience. It didn't matter I didn't have a cert. Didn't matter I didn't have a degree. It just mattered about experience and knowledge. And if you proving that over other people is extremely important. So third year, all the way to graduation. Okay, so I was a pen tester at A2N. I started in January 2017 after I did my report and everything for them. And in late 2017, I was like, I'm going to try to do the OSCP again. And epically failed. I think I got like maybe $3. I don't know. I don't remember. But I do remember that after that, I was like, you know what? I don't need that stupid cert anyways, because I'm already a penetration tester. So why do I care? And this is where I got into that rut. I got in that rut of like, I don't need to really keep trying. And it was a bad mindset, because it ended up affecting parts of my work that, actually flooded into other interviews that I went into that would obviously showed I wasn't being proactive in my field. I wasn't trying anymore. And it affected a lot of how my methodology transformed. So when I failed that, I got over it. I decided that I need to focus on other areas. So I started practicing what I was preaching to other people more. I wasn't going home and watching Netflix anymore. I was like, I need to get on this. So I retook it in 2019. I had a lot going on in 2018, but 2019, I retook it and I passed. Flying colors. I got 100 on it. I popped all 5 boxes, and then immediately after that, like a week later, I took the CH because why not? And at the time, CH was going through its transition period into what it is now, which I think is more hands-on. But either way, I had 2 certs underneath my belt. And I was like, you know what? I can apply to firms. This would be great. I got denied at 2 massive ones. And it did not go so well in my head, because I was like, man, like I really, really, really tried. And I had all these certs, but it didn't matter. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have what was needed for their shops. I did apply to a Trend Micro position, and I was offered the position, but I ended up passing on it because it wasn't the right path for me. I didn't realize that, and sometimes you will see that, and sometimes you will think that this will help me get into those other places, and it ended up being not the right path, because you might get stuck onto something that's obviously not going to help you in your field. For instance, maybe you are going to go become a penetration tester, but there's an IR position. You can kind of go that route, but you're going to be in that field for a bit longer. And same thing with vice versa. You can get into IR and you might have the dream of becoming a penetration tester, but it's going to take time. It's going to be a little bit more challenging to maneuver that way, but it's still very doable, and so I ended up passing on it because it wasn't the position that would benefit me the most. And it would look great on a resume, but that's not what I was about. I was about progressing my path. So I ended up taking another job instead as the team lead pen tester at ISSA Cybersecurity, and great people, great working atmosphere. But through that process, I was also still going through the applications with FireEye. And it worked out, and I was able to reapply and get accepted. And the big things that I learned from that was that as I was failing, I was recognizing where the demotivations were coming in and why my failure was a failure. And so I had to reassess that and just reapply myself by staying proactive and doing those things that I told you guys to do that will help. If you lose track of that, it's going to affect you, and it's just super important to just keep that in the back of your head, that even though you failed, there's still opportunity and there's still paths that you can take to get to where you want. So what I want to make sure that everyone understands from this whole thing is that if you start practicing now, you know, it's only going to help you on those interview questions, on those resumes, on those positions. Even if you were just to be gifted an entry level position from no experience, right? It only benefits you to help for yourself, for your clients, for your company to master what it is, right? For instance, maybe you're trying to get into SQL injection. You know, if you just Google dork a lot of SQL injection stuff, you're going to get a lot of hack the box write-ups, a lot of hack the box machines, a lot of YouTube talks, everything. If you can just master that, set up a lab, and just rinse and repeat that whole process, it's only going to benefit you. And when you come across an application that utilizes that, you're going to know immediately, right? Even if you familiarize yourself with it. Same thing, local or remote file inclusions. Maybe you want to do more advanced topics. You want to look at deserializations, which is huge. As much as it died years ago, it's still pretty prevalent on internal networks to find. So that kind of stuff is very important. The other side of it is, I still learn every day. I still learn all sorts of stuff. I want to take certifications, but I just don't have the time. I want to learn from these certifications. I don't care if I pass or fail them. I don't, because I'm going to get so much knowledge out of it. And I'm living proof that you don't need those certifications to get the job. Matter of fact, you only need to get out of it what you learn. And that side of stuff can be applied to all those questions, to all those interviews. Another important key thing that you need to do that I don't see much, and I forgot to mention during what will help you and prove to the firms or places that you apply to is follow up. Okay, if you don't know something during an interview question, you just say that. Just say, I'm not aware or I'm not sure, but I will get back to you on that, and note it down. I've gotten some great feedback from doing that, where I will give back a report, a very nice, professional, formalized report with headings and everything, and going over the things that I maybe didn't elaborate more on, or maybe I wish I did, or maybe I didn't know. And I would admit that, because when you're admitting that stuff, it really helps and show that you are willing to learn. Okay, which is all about this field. So some quick frequently asked questions. Will having a cert help me? No. It will help you not get a job. Okay, sorry. It won't help you get a job, but it will help you learn. Okay, so do that. So they will always help you, but they won't do the job side of it. It will just help you learn more, so you can maybe get those positions. Should I subscribe to any of these things? Yeah, do it. It'll help. Do grades matter in school? No, they don't matter after your first job. So like for your first job, yes, but after that, it's usually kind of not. How do I practice social engineering ethically? You're going to want to read a lot of books, practice on your people, which I'll get into more into the discussions later. But social engineering ethically can be practiced easily. There's a lot of books out there. Okay. Sorry that took too long, but here's Andrew.
Thanks, Kenny. Okay, yeah, I'll be not taking nearly as long as Kenny, because I can shorten this down a bit. This will be a good way into the incident response. And if you're not familiar with incident response, you in year 2, year 3, you start doing forensics. And as a subspecialization of forensics is incident response, which is usually a faster pace type of thing, and we'll show you a little bit of the differences as we go. Okay, I will preface this by the incident response type of work that I'm going to be talking about is the technical side of incident response and forensics. There are other paths. I'm just looking at in chat with John K, and he brings me back a little bit. There are incident response jobs, if you're interested in doing them, that are not technical. They're security focused, where you can be more of a incident manager versus the person who's doing an actual investigation. Okay, and it doesn't matter which way you want to go. It's good to know that both of those are things you can do. Okay. So this is going to look familiar because Kenny ripped off my slides. Coming in, not quite that fast, Kenny. Coming in, we're taking a look at what you guys know from the Sheridan program. I am a big fan of the technical skills that you learn. Operating systems, there was class where we basically learned to make a rootkit, right? So that level of operating system knowledge is invaluable. Networking, you can't get away from it when you're doing forensics and incident response, specifically with normal forensic or dead disk forensics. Networking is not as big, it's still a part of it. Of course, the forensic class will get you your basics, and the programming, you can get away without actually programming in this area, but it's good from a logical thinking standpoint. Okay. All those classes that you have to take, I don't remember if it was 6 or 7 different programming classes, teaches you how to think logically, and that's a very important skill going through this. Okay. I made this for maybe you want to come into this field and it wasn't a fresh graduate, or you've been doing something else. There's different ways in. If you come in with system or network administration, those are huge skills that can translate into incident response. Okay. Threat hunting is a very close brother. You do that type of work, and there's slight differences, usually on the technical side of what you need to be able to do. But threat hunting gives you that drive to go find what's wrong. Okay. And you can also come in from a governance. So if you have strong, just general security knowledge, that can be translated because you need that general security knowledge. Now it's time just to learn the technical details of how to do this specific job. So one of the big goals of this is we wanted to convey what it's actually like working in these jobs. A lot of people in school want to get into pen testing, into red team. That's the sexy thing coming out of this security program. Incident response is another area that I think a lot of people would like to get into, maybe don't know how to get there, right? So I want to give you an idea of what it's actually like so you can make that decision for yourself. A lot of it is very, very detail-oriented work. If you're looking through lots and lots of logs, you need to be able to spot that one thing that's different from the others, okay? Along the lines of that, lots and lots of log files, we work with a huge amount of data. So if I need to look at the forensic data and timeline that out for a single system, if it is, as an example, the first time a user logs in, I'm going to be looking at 10,000 lines of something. Now, if I need to take a good long look at the entire system, you could be looking at millions of lines of things. So it's a lot of data. I make the joke, it's not quite big data, but there's a lot of things that you need to be going through. For me, the difference between doing normal forensics and doing incident response is the pace at which you work. In forensics, you're going to have deadlines, things like that. Depending on where you're working, your job atmosphere, your specific duties. When you work on incident response, you generally need to produce those same answers at a much faster pace. Okay? If you are responding to a breach and there's an attacker in the network, you don't have a lot of time to get the answers and get them out of there. And because of that, this can be a stressful job. If you can't deal with stress in a positive manner, it might not be for you. Now, people can go through this stuff without stressing out and burning out, but it is something that's pretty common with everyone I've met who does this type of work. Much like the flexibility in working hours for red team, you need to be able to do that type of thing here. It's not necessarily, I'm going to be working 80 hours in a week. It's if you have a 9-to-5 job as your normal working hours, and then somebody calls up and said, we've been breached and it's 4:30, you're going to be working. And it's just, you need to be willing to have a little bit of that flexibility. And that's where you are in life if you can have that type of thing. good, go ahead and do it. I enjoy it. The place I work gives me that flexibility and rewards me for being able to do that. So finding the right fit is good. Job opportunities, I'm going to give you some specific things after this on what you can do to and what you can learn to find those opportunities and show somebody you deserve that job. And I feel like you have a lot better opportunity in IR than you do in, say, red teaming. That's because a lot of people want to do red teaming. A lot of people might be interested in IR, but they haven't made that step and they haven't shown any expertise in it. So a lot of places are hiring. And if you can show that initial step, you can go anywhere pretty much. Okay. So what you need outside of school, okay? In incident response specifically, you are going to be dealing with people who do hacking for a living. So a lot of knowledge is needed on current red teaming and pen testing trends, what type of things they're doing like that. I think most of the questions that I did in my interview process were aimed at what do you know about red teaming? And can you tell me how an attacker does this and how an attacker does that? Because you need to be able to think like an attacker so you can find those things that get generated when an attacker does something. Okay. CTFs are a little bit harder for forensics because they are generally made for pen testing or breaking into things. But things like Hack the Box and a couple others, they will have some forensic challenges. Not necessarily the most realistic of forensics that need to be done, but they're there, and it's something for you to knock on and try and break into in that type of manner, in the forensic manner. Okay. And then again, just showing interest in general security stuff, doing Sector when it's open, doing DEFCON 416 local stuff, all good and all things that can show some interest in the field. Okay. And I wanted to add a couple points on resume, and this is where I differ a little bit from Kenny on my personal preference and what I've seen work, and that's the personal interests. I think when you go into these type of interviews, it's good to have a couple personal interests that might not be related to this, to the field you're looking to go into, and that's because you want to show the person who's interviewing you some of the different things you like. And what I've experienced usually happens is they'll use that as a stepping point to make a connection with you and show some of their interests, and you can have a discussion that's not necessarily focused on the IR job or the forensics job or the pen testing job, just so you can get a feel of the other person. Okay. And the lack of experience is not going to hurt you sufficiently in this field because we're just looking for more people. Pretty much, I know about 6 or 7 different companies in the GTA who do forensic work, and they're all taking people right now. Right? It's a lot of room for growth here. So I'll break down what I guess you learn in the class environment as how you do forensics, and then I guess I want to call it a more modern approach, and we'll just show the difference. So in the classroom environment and in, say, a traditional forensic shop, you are going to go and take forensic images. You'll learn how to do forensic shutdown, how to preserve data properly, that type of thing. And what the usual cycle looks like is you will take an image, you will process that image with something like Ncase or Plaso. The free tool, if you want to take a look at that kind of thing, is Autopsy. It's a good one. You do your investigation, and if you found something that led to another system, you're going to repeat that process. You're going to go forensically image that system and keep going. The downside and the realistic I guess how it actually works in practice is that forensic imaging and that processing takes hours. That could take a day. Honestly, you might spend 2 to 3 hours imaging, 2 to 3 hours processing in something like EnCase if it's parsing everything. And it's a lot of time that you might not have in an incident response scenario. So the more modern type of work that a lot of companies are going with now is something called a live response. You will, instead of taking a forensic image, you will actually install something on that system. And what that something is going to do is it's going to pull out forensic artifacts that are very targeted versus doing a bit for bit copy and an analysis of an entire machine. So if I want one specific forensic artifact, it's going to go get that thing and be very quick about it. So we gather a bunch of these very targeted forensic artifacts. We do an investigation. From that, we take a look at what are our IOCs or indicators of compromise to try and map what the attacker's doing in a repeatable fashion. So if I see an attacker constantly using on this system and they're staging everything out of one directory, I'm going to take that and make an indicator of compromise saying always look in this directory for something. Okay. And I'm going to take that IOC and I'm going to search across every system that I have these agents on for that IOC. And what that'll help me do is identify other systems that the attacker's been on that I can now repeat this process is collecting those targeted artifacts, investigating, finding new IOCs, doing the sweep again, and repeat. Okay. So what's actually going to get you into a forensic and incident response job at this point? If you are going into co-op or you've done your co-op and you're graduating and looking for something, I'm looking to tell you the different areas. If you can talk about these and be knowledgeable in these areas, someone's going to pick you up. Okay? It might not be the first place that you apply to, but you have the knowledge for the basics. They can teach you the rest. Okay. And the very first thing is Windows. Windows is everywhere in the corporate world. As much as I enjoyed the stuff that we did in our forensics classes, it was not Windows focused. A lot of it was on Linux. A lot of it was on being able to read stuff in dead disk, being able to do the processes. And those are great things. But it's usually, you can never go with an always, it's usually not the case when you're doing forensics now. A lot of the places are going to be Windows shops. You got to be able to deal with that. Okay. And the big areas, if you can touch on these, this will get you in somewhere. Okay. First one's going to be persistence. So how does an attacker stay in a system once they've got there? Okay? There's going to be a couple different forensic artifacts to take a look at for this. These are the one of the biggest areas you can look at. Second is going to be interactive artifacts. So these are things that are generated on your Windows systems that most users don't know get tracked. There's a lot. Your Windows system records way too much information, and if you're interested in forensics and you start learning this path, you're going to find out real quick. It is a little scary with how much they keep. Usually not even on purpose, just people who do forensics have found ways to find this information. Knowing what RDP looks like, RDP is one of the, or remote desktop protocol, is one of the main ways a Windows user can connect to another Windows system. And it gives you as the name says, a desktop. And it is abused for the ease of use by attackers. If you get on a system, instead of trying to do command line stuff or try and go very technical to spread around, if you can open up a program, type in an IP address, and now you have a desktop that you can double click and drag stuff and copy and paste. It's much easier, it's much faster. So learning what that type of stuff looks like is great. So next one I have on here is PowerShell. PowerShell is a little bit on the decline. For the last, I don't know, 8 years, 10 years or so, PowerShell has been one of the main attacking tools by your bad guys. Okay, it has been so well fingerprinted now that most of the AV solutions, most of the EDR solutions, Windows Defender, every program knows how to look for these, and it's a battle between those vendors trying to detect and attackers trying to obfuscate or hide their PowerShell code a little bit more. And because that's been going on for so long, there's not much wiggle room left for change. So a lot of attackers are going down different routes now. But PowerShell and how to read it are a big thing. A lot of what you will see from those easy drive-by attacks is base 64 encoded PowerShell. So it's going to be one of the things you got to take a look at. And the last is going to be event logs. So in Windows event logs, you have application, you have system, security. Those are the big ones. And inside of those are a lot of records by the different parts of Windows that are going to tell you what's going on. As you get some experience knowing off the top of your head certain event IDs will be pretty important, because you're going to know what they mean just by seeing a number. And that type of thing you get with experience, but it's good now to be able to talk about it. The biggest example I'll give is in an interview, they might ask you, what does a Windows login look like? What does a RDP login look like? And in the Windows events, that'll be a specific event number with a very specific sub-event number. Okay? So having that type of context and looking into that is pretty good as well. Give me 1 second here. So I'm gonna highlight some of the big ones for the persistence and interactive artifacts. And this is just so you have an idea of the different things to take a look at. Like if you want to take a screenshot of this slide and the next slide, these are your things. If you go out and look up these 10, 12 things, you're going to be in a pretty good spot to start your Windows forensics career. Okay. In the registry, we're taking a look at things like run keys, and that's going to be an area on the Windows system that it automatically interprets when the system starts up to run whatever this run key is pointing at. So if it points at an executable, it's going to run that executable. That's most likely malware. Okay. Attackers like to abuse services in there because services have very high privileges. Okay. Easy way to hide something. You can put it anywhere on the system and you're good to go. Tasks, same type of thing. Another easily schedulable type of persistence that can be set up. Startup folders. Okay. These are going to be set locations on the system that if you put something in there, again, when that user logs in, it's going to start those. Okay. WMI and shims, I wanted to list them. They're a bit more advanced, and you don't see them quite as often, but these are the type of, not trick questions you might get, but the type of questions that you might get to see how well you understand persistence. WMI is something attackers are using a lot more, and there is a WMI database on a system, on a Windows system, that pretty much has a trigger and an action database. So if something on a system happens, this action is going to be the result. So attackers can store information in there and have set it up for a very common trigger. Something happens, their malware gets run. Okay. Shims are not as easy to explain, but it's one to take a look at. It's basically how Windows interacts with, or sorry, how your executable can interact with the Windows API, and how that changes over time is dealt with in shims. Okay. Now that can be abused. So you can say, have your executable or put in a shim. So when an executable tries to do some type of compatibility thing for a newer or older version of Windows, it does something completely different. Okay. So that's the last one I wanted to highlight for you. Interactive artifacts. So if you have persistence on the, how are they going to get back in? How are they hiding? The interactive artifacts are going to be, what did they do when they were on that system? Okay. So shell bags are, what's a good explanation? If you open up a file explorer, your Windows Explorer, and look at your file system, the settings for your window are captured in a shell bag. And that's going to be captured in the path that you're looking at. So if you're looking at Windows System 32, there's going to be a shell bag recording that you went there. So you can track people like that. Okay. Link files are created, usually they can be created by people, but if you open up a file, almost always a link file is going to be generated. So to actually get you to that file, and those can be traced. User assist is something that if you are double clicking on an icon on a desktop, there's a user assist artifact that's generated just to make that process a little faster next time. But it's one of the ways that we can track what you're actually doing on a system. Okay. Jump lists are, they're the record of what a program has opened. So say you have Office open. At the bottom of your screen, in your taskbar, it's going to have Office. And if you right click, it'll give you a couple options for that program. And then it's going to list the 10 most recent documents that you've opened with the program. Those are jump lists. Those are stored. And that's one of the ways that we can tell what program is accessing what. Okay. So in this case, I gave you an example of documents, but that could be anything. Okay. For both of these, I want to, if you're looking for some quick tools on how to actually investigate these, like if I give you the names, great, but how do you parse this information out? Take a look at Eric Zimmerman tools. Just go Google it. There'll be a lot of information there, but the top result's always going to be his webpage, and he makes a lot of open source tools that look at all of these different forensic artifacts. Guy has a lot of knowledge, and he's very good about sharing it. So he's one I'll always plug for new people getting into this. So the overall, okay, how do you actually go from school and taking that knowledge, even about those specific artifacts, and translate it into entering the forensic or incident response field? Okay, it's important to know you don't need to know everything. I'm constantly learning. When I got my job at KPMG Forensics Lab, I didn't know any forensics. Well, let's correct that. I knew the forensics that they had taught in school, which has its use, but isn't necessarily what you do in practice. Okay. When I got my job at Mandiant, I didn't know that I didn't know the things that I don't know, but it was a shock to me how much I didn't know, that they don't expect you to know everything, right? You have to be able to willing to grow when you go into the field. There's way too many things you can learn, and way too much knowledge for you to know everything. Okay. Rely on your strengths that Sheridan gives you, right? That operating system knowledge, that networking knowledge, that program and logical thinking knowledge. If you can program, great. You can always find a use for usually scripting, because there's the difference there. Quick things that you can pull together in something like Python happens all the time. Okay. Certifications, not really required. Certifications in forensics are few and far between. On the introductory slide, Kenny had his certifications. He had OSCP, he had CEH. Next to my name, I got a big fat nothing. It's not needed to get in here. It's not needed while you're practicing. It's something you can have if you want to progress your career a little bit, but it's not in any way, shape, or form required. Okay. And here's where I want to talk about the different types of work that you can do. Okay. So when I started doing this, my goal was to go to a big four, spend a couple years there, and use that experience and that big four on my resume to jumpstart my career and go wherever else, right? So there's different ways you can go about this. Consulting is one. And when you look at consulting, there's a huge discrepancy in the size and target of the clients. A big four is not going after a small company that has 15 employees and 10 servers or 10 systems. They might not even have servers set up, right? But there's always opportunity to do work with consulting companies that are smaller and target that size range. Or I want to say, it's hard to categorize this, but you could do small, medium, large type of consulting companies, and they all have different targets that they go after. You don't need to do consulting to do forensics, and you don't need it to do incident response, okay? The biggest example of this and the easiest reachable ones in Canada are the big banks. You can work at a company, internally do their incident response, internally do their forensic, and you're going to have more than enough work to keep on going. Okay. Government work as well. Is as much as they don't talk about it, the spy agencies in Canada all do this type of work. Government is a path. Military now has their cyber operators who do red team, and they do incident response. Okay, so there are different paths, and it doesn't need to be because I came in with my experience and how I did it. I'm going to tell you how you need to do it, right? Find something that works for you. Find something that works at your pace, and something you can enjoy. When I did my time at KPMG, I finished my 8 months. I didn't enjoy it. I still kept on the job for a couple of months after I graduated until I found the next place I was going to go. But find something that works for you. Okay? There we go, Kenny. Okay, Kenny, you come on back in because you made this slide so we can talk about it.
Yeah. So the big things that I think I've learned during red teaming, penetration testing in general is getting good at taking notes. If you can get good at it now, you'll only be better for it in the future when you start on your report writing processes, as well as just taking time to write out in like a schedule of like goals. You know, if you have like goals, like maybe this week you want to achieve XYZ, you want to learn how to do cross-site scripting, for instance, you know, setting like those goals really helped me. I had a goal for OSCP. And then after I failed that, I had other goals to get better at what I did do good at it. And that was mainly privilege escalation, I think, at the time. Now it's like nothing. It's easy now. Unless if it's a fully patched system, of course. But it is definitely something that wasn't easy until I just, you know, put out like those goals. So yeah, notes and planning. Knowing your tool set, so important. And this kind of goes into trust but verify. I always say trust but verify to a lot of the people I mentor, I guess, or friends with. I always say that because I have been on the bad end of running the tool and not really fully understanding what it's doing, but just enough that I read the README and I'm like, oh, this is cool. I understand what this is. So boom, I'm just going to run it. And it just had catastrophic events. Recent even for me. And it's just all part of like the learning process. But if you don't know your tool set, you're not going to succeed that well. And so you want to Also, trust but verify what it is, the information that you're being given. I've been on the other receiving end also of going after assets that were not in scope, but the client gave me a list of said assets that they didn't own. If I had done my OSINT, like I mentioned in the beginning, on those targets, I would have recognized that this does not belong to this client. So you want to trust them, but you're going to have to verify those kind of things. I've seen that happen to a lot of other people too in the career field, where they accidentally break into a box because they didn't do the proper reconnaissance. They didn't do thorough enough reconnaissance, and they didn't validate with the client. This is huge for both Andrew and I, but that is high level. Does not mean you have the knowledge in that at all. I have been on the bad receiving end of interviews going through this as well. I might stumble through an interview question such as, walk me through how a responder works, which is a great tool. You should learn it. I had to write a whole paper about it because I thought I knew what responder did, and I thought I knew down to the packet level, and I definitely didn't, because I only went off of the high level of it, or I might only have a high level knowledge of what a penetration test is, but I don't actually know what goes into it. I don't know the reconnaissance methodology that is practiced, right? Enough, right? I know the high level. Oh, you might, do recon on the people and the assets and stuff, but you don't go into detail. Like, okay, well, how do you look at the people? How do you get usernames? How do you generate a list of users? Okay, how do you ascertain that asset does belong to the company? How do you pick apart certs that are attached to these assets, and other details? So having a high level will not really get you through some interviews. I've been in interviews though where it does, but not all the time.
I'll add on to this for the forensic side, because this is one I wanted to highlight.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to speak about, say, those artifacts that I had in my slides, and being able to use a tool to get them out, and then knowing what they mean, is what I want to call high level knowledge here. Okay, so the actual knowledge would be, how are those things stored on the system? How are they affected when different things happen? What cause and effect actually makes those things happen? How they're stored, how they're interpreted, and when those things can't be trusted. For example, those shell bags that I mentioned, they get changed in erratic manners. If ransomware runs on a system and encrypts all the files, you're going to see what looks like a user accessing a couple hundred directories in the exact same second. Okay, now that's not practical, and being able to spot that type of thing and knowing why that happens is what I'd qualify as the knowledgeable part of forensics, versus just, here's a shell bag, it means that a person went here at this time. That's the high level. You want to be able to go a little bit deeper and know why things happen. That way you can transfer that knowledge and know what it means and explain it in a meaningful way. That's what I'm looking for. That's going to be what people in interviews are looking for, because they'll challenge you on those things that you say you know, because they're going to want to make sure that you really know it versus using the buzzwords. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
This, I'll just harp on this next one, and Kenny can take off. You're going to make mistakes as you're going. It's 100% going to happen. You're going to have successes. You're going to have failures. When you fail, it happens. Just know it happens to everyone, and it sucks. It really sucks sometimes. But if you do something and you make a mistake, it's okay. Most likely, I want to say most likely, you're not getting fired over a mistake. Okay, unless it is so egregious that there's nothing like that. Mistakes happen. They're expected. Take ownership. Tell your boss. See what you can do better and move on. Honestly.
Yeah, and I am definitely one that has made a lot of mistakes in my field, especially because not every asset that you're targeting is going to be, strong enough. It's going to be, it might just have some kind of weird configuration or, memory corruption, whatever it is that you just touch it and it just says, nah, I'm going to bleed everywhere. I've I've taken out a payment system right before the weekend for a county parking ticket system, just by authenticating to the system the week prior. Like, what I mean by that is, like, I authenticated into it to do some reconnaissance. Like, this user was local admin, it was, and then it came back. But just doing that affected the service itself, and it brought it down. So when people had to pay their parking tickets over the weekend, it didn't actually, occur. The transaction never actually happened. Now, you could call that a bug because it actually went through according to the user side, so they can argue it. But yeah, no, that happens. And sometimes it's just out of your control. Other times it is in your control, where you'll just password spray an entire 1,000-user database and just lock out every single account because you didn't program something correctly, which is, it happens. Owning up to it is extremely important because it will also show that you can learn, but keeping track of your failures is also important because it shows where you're going and, maybe something you got to work on more of. Experience is just going to be the experience. And you will always learn more by doing more. It's you don't sit there and just run a tool and just think that you're like the best of the best. You don't just sit there, run the tool and be like, okay, I'm not a script kiddie because I know how to run this tool. Knowing your tool sets, trusting but verifying, having more knowledge, okay, that's all going to come from experience. Okay. So it might take a year, it might take 4 for that to actually sink in, but it's going to. Another huge thing that doesn't get talked a lot about, I think, enough, is that there's heavy burnout in our field. I'd say both fields, really, and that's because there's just so much going on. There's so much that's dropping all the time, and there's just so much going on in the world that when you're trying to keep up with the latest exploits, even though you have like a backlog of all these other ones you want to try out, right? It's usually you don't get to try out those until you're on the engagement. So burnout is real. Take the time to better yourself, but also relax. If you want to watch Netflix, watch Netflix that day. I mean, I take at least right now I take 2 days out of the week, but minimum I take 1 day out of the week to do something, to learn something new. And it's exciting for me. And that's just how I cope with it. I don't do it every day. When you guys are in school, it's very important that you don't let burnout take over. If you got to study, you got to study. Focus on your grades now because they are very important. And when you get into the career fields, it's important to manage your time. Okay, so focusing on what should be more prioritized now is extremely important than burning yourself out, and also relaxing. So
we don't
other
have
than
it on the
that,
slide here, okay, but I do want to say I'm a huge fan of the co-op program here. One of the biggest things, if you haven't had that, if you haven't gone through your co-op yet, is put your effort into getting a co-op. Put the effort in, because that first jump is your first jump into work experience. Okay. And if you can do well in that, you're going to do well after. Okay. And I'll just mention some stuff because I'm seeing a little bit of discussion in chat. You're not really in school, you're not really aware of the ebbs and flows of hiring and things like that. But think about this ahead of time. When you're graduating, everybody else is graduating too, and they're trying to line up jobs. So you most likely want to be doing this a couple months before if you haven't nailed something down already. Just in general, more positions open up in February and March because people want to wait for their year-end bonuses to come in before they go and take a new job. So they'll stick it out through December and early January, say, take it easy, I'm out of here, and go find a new job. So you do have a lot of positions that open up on yearly and semi-annually type of flows. And it's just as you get more experience, keep an eye out for those things because that will help you find a position at the right time. That's all I got for you.
So yeah, I know that it was a little longer than expected. Mostly because of me. I apologize. I just had so much I wanted to say, and not enough time to say it. So I blame time, not me. Yeah. So, if anyone has any questions, I kind of went through some of them in chat. But for Andrew or I will say that I wish I had like more information to give you guys, because I always get hit up all the time like, hey, how do I get to where you're at? Or, I want to go on like this path and everything. And that's what I just want everyone to get out of this for both of us, because we didn't have mentors. Right, Andrew? I don't think we did. I didn't really have a mentor. Like, I mean, obviously, I had mentors like in school, like professors and stuff, that are just fantastic, to help, and they give amazing advice. And, that alone has helped me, while I was in school. But I noticed that after I left, I didn't really have that opportunity. So I'm hoping to at least give back enough that I can help other people get onto that. So I'm actually going to post in here a list of things real quick as we answer questions.
Yeah, I didn't really use the club as much as I could have. Like I went to
Yeah.
the meeting, but I wasn't big on Discord. I wasn't really talking to people outside of my year group. You have a lot of resources of people who graduated recently and people who graduated 5, 6 years ago, something like that, who are always willing to answer questions. Like they've all been where you are now, and they want to help you through it, right?
Yeah. So yes, Rick, I wonder, the best assignment I ever did was definitely the rootkit one, because you let me put it up on the internet, and I immediately regretted it. I regretted it. I'm sure you did too, because then you couldn't use it again. But that's okay. I took it down. Yeah, no. I think the best assignment that I got out of was the rootkit one. I learned a lot from, as well as the secure coding one, where we had to think about how we would make our applications, and we'd have to defend our applications, right? That was super fun. As well as a lot of the forensics ones. A lot of the forensics ones were amazing.
So I wasn't like driven towards forensics at this point, but my most memorable, and it wasn't even an assignment, it was an exam, was I'm hoping that you guys are still doing this, was the forensic teacher set up a room, said, here are your groups. Your exam was to go in.
Oh God, that was the best.
Actually collect what was in the room, take pictures, take notes.
Yeah, Eugene. Yeah.
Say you're gonna do things in a forensic fashion, and it was great.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was like hands-on, because they didn't prepare you enough for that, which that's they're not supposed to. I get it, but there's a lot of hands-on stuff that we didn't do, that you will have to do in your off time, by all means. But that was a good one. I really liked that one. Pretty much the whole program set me up for success, down to coding. Like literally, guys, I came from nothing. I knew how to shoot guns and arrest people, and most of that was just drunk people. And now I break into companies and I tell them how to fix their stuff, all because of the program that you guys are in. So
Things like starting out with Richard. I don't know if Richard still teaches the first programming course. The C, was it C? It wasn't C++. It was C. And the guy, he knows how to teach the basics.
Yeah.
And he does it well. And even if it's a really hard programming class, that type of thing is great just to learn.
Yeah, any kind of programming, big time.
We got a new teacher who is my son, who's like amazing, like probably one of the best teachers I ever had, teaching C and a couple of the Java courses.
Yeah. No, it is as much as so. By the time we got to fourth year, like we had done way too many. I want to say way too many. We did a lot of programming classes. Just even if you don't enjoy programming, know that you're getting something out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As much as we harp on this, Kenny and I, when you've done your 6 database courses and there's been one graduate in the history of this program that's gone on to do DBA work, you still learn stuff doing that. Every class has a purpose. Just find what they're trying to teach you versus maybe the specific content and go with it.
Yeah, it's all beneficial, no matter which way you cut it. Yeah. So I don't really see any other.
Hey there,
Kenny.
guys. Go
Yeah,
ahead,
go-
Loy.
No, no.
All you, Loy. No. You go.
Okay. Yeah, no, I had a couple of questions if you don't mind.
Sweet.
So questions for both of you. I guess I'll start with Kenny. So you mentioned programming. I'm just wondering, as a red teamer, do you spend more time maybe using scripting languages, automating stuff, or do you spend more time with like C# and C++, where you're doing kind of like exploit dev or exploit research?
Well, that's a good question. Both, all the time. I have a dedicated VM with Commando VM, and I've been using that for years before I was at FireEye, and well, a year or two, however long it's been released. But I had our own dedicated VM where I would just do C# stuff because you're making executables to run on systems or in execute assembly in whatever C2 you have of your choice, whether it's paid or free, like Covenant or something. And I'm always scripting out, whether it be in Bash or Python, Perl, whatever it is, mostly Bash and Python, and to automate stuff, whether it be password spraying. I know it's surprising that not a lot of people actually grasp that, but password spraying is like the easiest way in that I get in from easy passwords. And but if I can automate that, or if I can automate exploit development as well, like making out of like a template some kind of payload or an HTA document, or automating my deployment, which I have an entire script that I developed myself with my friend Alex, actually Sasha, where it just deploys my infrastructure for me in an automated way. That I love. So yeah, no, both. It's very, very important for both.
I use it in mostly a scripting fashion, and it's just because I need to be able to go through a lot of data, or maybe correlate data. For example, like those when I talk about remote desktop protocol and event logs. Well, those are things like single entries. So somebody connected, somebody disconnected. Those things aren't happening one after another. There's 3,000 lines in between them. So I might make something that would find that first one, identify the second one, and put it into a single entry for me so I can interpret it quickly. That's the type of quick scripting that you do. It's usually not the more intensive tool development, which is where you get into I want to call real programming. But that's the things where you would learn and use compiled things. So you're dealing with efficiency and developing new ways to do something versus solving your immediate problem.
Thank you for your answers. Andrew, I'm glad you actually mentioned kind of scripting in IR. I'm wondering, and you mentioned correlation as well. So I'm just wondering, have you ever so during your engagements, when you're on an engagement, do you ever work with the blue team in the organization? Do you ever like advise them on things that they should look for in the event logs post incident?
So I'd like to be able to do that sometimes, but in a forensic capacity and an incident response capacity, I might be able to give suggestions, but it would be in a discussion like this, because when I
Right.
deliver something at the end, there is zero opinion in it. It is 100% fact. This is what happened. This is not my opinion of what happened. So I can do that type of thing in an informal manner. But with the type of work that I do and the size of companies that I'm working with, unfortunately, those blue team guys usually failed at something, and that's why I got called in. So they're on a very defensive footing, and might not be the easiest people to work with at that time because they're worried about their jobs. So we can try and impart some of our wisdom, but it's usually not the reason we're there. Not for incident response. There's all types of security work that you can do with that type of work. It's just not something that I'm doing too often.
That's interesting. It almost seems like there should be a way to be able to impart that knowledge in a way that doesn't seem like combative.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great if you can do it in a non-pressure situation. Okay,
Mhm.
and I deal with a lot of pressure situations. Um, if you go in and the company is going to be okay, depending on what happened, like it's not going to cost them, their business isn't going to shut down, it's not going to cost them millions of dollars, then it's usually a pretty lighthearted affair, and you can do that type of thing. But it's not it's not an all the time. It's not I'm going to do this every time I talk to or I'm doing an engagement type of thing.
Right. Thank you. And you mentioned like an agent that you deploy on endpoints as part of kind of like active response. I assume you mean kind of like an EDR solution. And you mentioned, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah. So we use FireEyes because we are part of the FireEye organization. But that
Makes sense.
includes like the biggest name thing out there is CrowdStrike. Right?
Mhm.
If you're looking for something free that you can go and learn, it's a little bit complex to set up. But Google has something called Google Rapid Response where you can do this yourself and learn with an EDR type of solution.
Do you find that the features on different EDR solutions are pretty comparable? Like if I do work on one, I'm very quickly able to kind of repeat the same thing on a different product.
So that's, yeah. Okay, let me step back. Most EDRs have a base set of features that they share across the board. Okay.
Mhm.
Now looking at the things on there is going to require a little bit of forensic knowledge or security knowledge, and that translates from one to the other, even if you have to learn how to do it in that specific tool. And then different EDR solutions have their perks. Okay. CrowdStrike has everything in a extremely large and fast Splunk instance that you can query across everything incredibly quickly. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, FireEye technology has stuff built into it where we can get deep in those forensic artifacts that you don't do in CrowdStrike. So each of the different EDR solutions has a base where they're all good at something, and then each of them has individual things, and the knowledge can transfer.
Okay, thank you. And my final question, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking up some time. It's for both of you. So both of you mentioned that you kind of have to do quite a bit of reading and you know really get to the low level in both your fields. You know, and I do, for example, like the Twitter thing. I try to read like 2 to 3 articles a day. Um, but what I find a really hard time doing is actually prioritizing what I should read. So I'm just wondering, do you have a system whereby you say, okay, well, out of these 10 articles, I'm going to read these 3, or out of these, 50 tools, I'm going to focus on these 2 or these 5?
Okay.
So I can answer that with my own personal experiences with this. So what I do is I used to use Trello as a bit of like a scheduler kind of thing. I learned that while I was in school actually. I think what was it? It was our capstone, Andrew? We had to use that Nick had us use. He had us use some kind of scheduling task management system, and ever since then I've been using it, and I just switched over from that to Notion because it has a bookmarks bar that allows me to, if I'm on like a Git or a Medium article or whatever it is, and I don't have time to read it right now, but it looks super interesting. Either I will retweet the tweet and then I'll go back through my tweets again. But in most cases, I just click on my bookmark bar, my little extension for Notion, and then I'll add it to my reading list. And normally from there, I just categorize it. I have Gits, I have Active Directory articles, I have new exploits, I have all sorts of stuff. And so I just keep track of it in there. And then usually in the morning, I'll just read one of them. I'll sip on my coffee or my tea or whatever I'm having, and I'll read one of them. I don't master it, only when it's necessary. For instance, there was a penetration test I was on that I was able to compromise a system that had that was not a domain controller, but it was an unconstrained delegation system. And what that basically means is that it can perform queries and tasks as a domain controller. So you could effectively, be the end all be all to get hashes or what have you from the Active Directory from any user, for instance, is what I would use this for. So I got onto a system that had unconstrained delegation. I knew nothing about it. I was like, whoa, I've never actually done this before. So I went back through my article list in Notion or Trello, whatever I had at the time. And it was more of a mess in Trello, but it's still doable. But I use Notion for that now. And I just went through the write-ups on it. And I was like, oh my goodness, thank goodness I saved these, because it was very, very, very important for me at the time. So sometimes I won't read them until then. But if I can find technical analysis, I will really dive into them. But that's my note taking, anyways.
I do it. I have a very unique opportunity where I work, and that's really driven how I learn things. So I'm in a much more reactive type of learning thing. If news comes out about a new exploit or methodology, the ones that I'm looking into are the ones that are blowing up everywhere. Everyone starts talking about them. I'll start following that type of thing, and then I'll take a look and learn the details, not just the high level, but how it works. Okay. And the second one, and this is the one that people who aren't working in forensics and IR aren't going to have access to, is when you're doing this stuff, I deal with a lot of advanced persistent threat groups or financially motivated, very advanced attackers. And I'll run into things I don't know what they're doing, right? And what do I do to go out and learn is when I see something in an investigation I don't know, I might spend the next couple days researching it. And it's unfortunate that I can't say, here's how you can go out and do it without that opportunity, but it's just how I've grown into my learning style now.
Yeah, that's pretty important. Well, what you just mentioned, keeping up with the current trend is probably more important in a lot of areas. If you can prioritize your discussions and your reading material, that's even more important. So
yeah,
based on your situation, yeah.
You're not going to see in one place. You're going to see it everywhere. Pay attention to those things. Dig into those things. It doesn't matter what field you're going into. When the big things roll around, you'll see it everywhere. Just pay attention.
Yep. Just read into it, and you'll realize, maybe they put out a patch for it, and then suddenly everyone's talking about how the patch can be bypassed. So, but you wouldn't know about it if you weren't paying attention to the first iteration of it. So it's pretty entertaining for certain scenarios.
Right. So what I've heard is really keep an information sort of tracking system. So use like a Trello or Notion, and then try to get into the habit of reading one or two articles a day, and then at the same time also follow the current trends that are happening, things that are blowing up everywhere.
Yeah,
but don't let it burn you out.
If you're scrolling through Twitter and you see a lot of people talking about this one thing, hop on it. It's not a bad thing to get on that bandwagon and learn. So
Right.
those are usually the good ones.
As a side note, real quick, sorry, Andrew, you're pretty low talking.
Sorry.
No worries.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for both of you for the great talk. And I'm glad you mentioned Alex slash Sasha, because that was also another great talk.
Yeah. Alex has been a good friend of mine for some time. And he's got a lot of failures and successes underneath his belt as well. So you'll notice that, and pretty much everyone does. And I think it's best if we are able to pass on those as much as we can to other people, so that they can steer their way through and maneuver into whatever field they're trying to get into. And if they don't know, at least they have more knowledge into it to help them make that decision. So awesome. No, thank you. And yeah, maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Is it okay if you guys have time for a couple more questions? Because I have a couple, but if you guys
Yeah,
are busy or you guys
I
want
do.
to go to sleep, you guys are
Yeah,
good.
no
I gotta
rush.
work in like an hour, so
Okay. So I think on like a more general level, what do you? Because I've had conversations with a couple of my friends about this. Is in Would you recommend focusing on I guess school and school related activities and getting your grades up, or would you kind of take away from those things and kind of look at other tools, so looking into articles, finding the latest trends, doing things like hack the boxes or CTFs? Where's that balance? What do you guys think is more important? And it's for both of you.
While you're in school, you really have to do a good job. As much as we can say grades don't matter after, they do matter while you're there. And a grade isn't so much, a grade is a byproduct of you putting forth the effort. Okay. So if you can put forth the effort, you're also going to usually have some time to put forth that effort on the side thing that you want to learn. But first and foremost, you have to graduate. And if you're graduating and you're doing well, that translates to the success after.
yeah, grades. The only time grades do not matter is after your positions, and if you're not going to go for positions in education as well, because really, in my experience, they don't really look at you had a 4.0 GPA, and like 5 years down the line kind of thing. So like they matter for when you first break into the industry, when they matter if you're going to go into those education routes.
Mhm.
And they extremely matter for the knowledge that you take out of it, like what he mentioned. Like, so that's it. So whenever we say that, it's not that they don't, because they definitely freaking do.
Right.
It is definitely more of managing your time, like you said.
Mhm.
And if you can achieve both, then you're going to be successful in all areas. If you got a 4.0 GPA and you have, attempting a certification, bro, like you got some knowledge there. So how I did it was exactly the kind of knowledge I parted on to other people. Was
Mhm.
we had classes and then we didn't have classes, and we had homework and we didn't have homework. So I did both. I did stuff where when if I didn't have homework, I gave myself homework. Man, during spring breaks and during after terms and stuff like that, whenever it was, whenever you had like downtime, I would
Mhm.
always read a new book. I would read The Art of Exploitation, second edition. I remember that was like my first book that I was reading about, and I was learning about buffer overflows, and all that jazz, and it was fantastic. And I knew nothing at the time, but I went through it. And then another break, I was learning social engineering. I mean, audiobooks, practicing on my wife. Well, she's my wife now. She used to be my girlfriend. Family members on people at freaking school. It's what I did.
Mhm.
So when you can incorporate that into your life, it's pretty awesome. Another
Having said
side of
that,
it,
though,
yeah,
it's a little bit harder right now with COVID because you guys aren't in school.
yeah,
We would, what our normal day or week looked like was we'd get our classes. Class would be over. You have 2 hours till another class. You put your head
Right.
down. You get your shit done. Okay.
Hmm.
If you have 2-3 hours, maybe sometimes we had big gaps, 4 hours in between classes. We would sit around in the common or the library area and screw around and learn those fun things. Do a little bit of research, talk about it with each other. Because as much as reading is going to do for you, having that discussion, bouncing it off someone else so you can figure out and actually understand what it means, that was the big one.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think sorry, Andrew. I think you had something to say as well. Or Kenny, you had something to say to add.
Yeah. That's just, I'm just going to reiterate the advice that I give to a lot of people, and that is, if you want to do things on the side and you want to juggle school and being proactive, you easily can. I did it for 3 years.
Right.
Okay, you don't have to, play video games every night. You can, learn something new. You could, or just play video games every night that you have time to, and watch your Netflixes and go out parties. Go talk to people. It is different, like you said, during COVID. You have the time, but I know that
Hmm.
everyone's involved in other stuff. I'm a dungeon master, been like that for 4 or 5 years now, and I made time for my friends all the time, and I made time to learn, and I made time to better myself and be good at school. I mean, I had flying colors in school as well, so it's not like it's not doable. It's just prioritizing is. So
Right.
prioritizing is probably the key takeaway.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
To give you an idea, I was able to do a full-time job, be in school, and still get some of that extra in for learning. So
Wow.
what that tells me is you
Anyone can
have
do
the
it.
time.
Yeah.
You have the
I was
time.
part time and did the same
Gotta
thing.
gotta train yourself to actually do it. That's it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I really like what you guys said, and I also really like kind of what Flip said on the Discord, is that like changing your assignments into something that would work for you. I really think that that's a good piece of advice. Another thing, since you guys were already graduated, and I think Andrew, you mentioned it, that your co-op placement kept you on after you graduated. In your experience, what do you have to do during that co-op term? And since this is actually perfect timing, because I am looking for a co-op, and I think a lot of third years are right now. Is like, what do you have to do during your co-op? How do you stand out in so that they keep you on after you graduate, or do you think that that's something that just comes naturally because of the field that we're in?
No, so there was plenty of people who didn't continue. So I had I did part-time work after co-op at the same place and then went full-time, and that was just part of the plan. So
Right.
what worked really was taking the first month or two and really learn. Like you got to be a sponge at that point. But after that, you need to be able to show them, and you need to be not you have to be assertive. Once you have that knowledge, don't be the person who they can just roll over. You know
Right.
stuff, demonstrate that you know stuff, and they're going to want to lock you in.
That
Honestly.
makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Yeah, I think one thing, I like a specific question for you, Andrew, is um uh is in school. I know you guys touched on this a decent amount, and you've been in the program. Um what is it that really sticks out, that aside from programming, because I know you guys really nailed on that, that you should really focus on, and really kind of just take in as much as much as you can in to go into that field that you're in.
So it's spread over a bunch of different classes. Um,
Hmm.
but what you learn about operating systems there and how they work, how drivers work, how architecture is done, you don't really need to know your assembly, but assembly teaches you different ways that CPUs work. And just the general knowledge of how computers work and how it can be applied is something that a lot of other schools, even if they're trying to teach you security or computer science, you don't get.
Right.
And and networking classes
Right.
are huge. And the reason why is because you see so many different architectures out there that without that course, I alone wouldn't be where I'm at. Networking class, there's many different types of it that are just all in all enveloped and applicable to, I'd say, both sides, especially my side, because you'll just be dropped somewhere on that network that you're practicing in, and on what's it? What was it called? GNS3? Is you guys still use GNS3 and all that?
Yeah,
fun jazz?
I actually just learned that today. That's actually
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So like,
Yeah.
just soak that all up because you're gonna need to know it if you ever want to be a
Right.
pen tester or a red teamer, because you could just end up at some part of the network and you're like, and they might have network restrictions and you got to figure out a way around that. And you also got to know what services are what running on what ports, so that kind of stuff,
Right.
I'd say. So any class like that, but I mean, a lot of the classes did. I'm not gonna,
Right. No, I agree.
so.
Okay. For sure. I really want to thank both of you guys. I don't know if you guys realized, at one point we had over, I think, 50 people watching on Discord and YouTube combined,
Ooh.
which is like super, super good in our book. So I also like Kurt and Jem's talk. They both killed it. So thank you both. You guys did a phenomenal job. I think we all learned a ton, and it was perfect that you guys spoke today, because a lot of us third years, if there are any watching or we're watching, are going to be applying very soon. So thanks again. Really appreciate your time.
No, thank you, everyone. And yeah, start now.
For sure. Kurt, do you want to end off or?
Yep, beautiful. Thanks, guys. Thanks everybody for coming. Have a great night. We'll see you again 2 weeks.
For sure. Take it easy, everyone.
Thanks, guys.